Welcome back. This is Collapse Talk with Gabriel Marrero, and it's so glad to have you back. It's good for me to record again. Well, not considering stuff that's been happening, but yeah, I just wanted to get a recording out. This is I'll be honest, this is a bit of a rushed episode, but yeah, I just wanted to get some stuff out because, I have classes starting up within a couple weeks. I believe I have all my registration stuff in order. So yeah, just holding out, but I will be honest, I have some, other professional stuff that needs to get done. I have to do like this online course for this new job that I'm getting recruited for. So, hopefully I'll get through that because it's like, it's for a state insurance license. So for property insurance. So that would be a good opportunity for me to step up and, have some real work, but I have to do this training course. But at the very least, before I start really diving headfirst, because it's going to require like a lot of focus, I wanted to get a recording out and just talk about different stuff around the world. But yeah, when I recorded, it was right on, in the wake of Roe v. Wade and in the, on the eve of July 4th. So, it was a pretty, I will be honest, last episode I was a bit emotional, but of course, things are not good. And of course, you have to deal with a lot of trolls online just saying like, oh, you're going to keep crying, oh, because you can't kill babies. Like, shut the fuck up, man. Like already, they're talking about the 10-year-old girl in Ohio, and people are just like there's such a disconnect. And there are people going harder after the doctor who provided the abortion versus the actual rapist. To be honest, I can't follow that story too much because it's just so depressing that it's a whole discourse now. And people are genuinely saying, oh yeah, no, definitely, we shouldn't abort the pregnancy. This is a good opportunity for this woman, a 10-year-old girl. You know what? I don't want to focus on that right now because everything is just shitty. However, I will talk about a different story, another shitty story. Being that I'm in Texas, with the Uvalde shooting, there's now new leaked information coming out, or new leaked video that came out, and yeah, it's pretty damning. It's again, just new details come out about this, and it's just it keeps getting worse. What the fuck? Again, I can only laugh at this. Not that the situation is funny, but just because it's tragic. I've really I've cried about it, thinking about those kids, but just the police, it's just so absurd, and the only response is it's just to laugh, because you couldn't even write this stuff. If you wrote this stuff in a show, people would say no, this is unrealistic. Come on, really, there's a massacre and the police are just on their phones, just getting hand sanitizer. Come on, of course the police would have some urgency, right? Of course the police would sack. No, this is what happened. And also, this stuff was leaked. So, again, there's a reason why they wanted to hide this stuff. And there's a reason why the police, they kept changing their story. And they're just not looking good. And not a single officer has been fired. There was the school police chief, Arredondo, who resigned. So that's about as far as it went. But that police force is still there. They haven't disbanded it. In fact, I also believe that they have extra reinforcements from local counties and even federal agencies because the people are pissed off. And it's just and of course these guys are a gang and they are looking out for each other now because that's what they do. That when they look bad, they look out for each other. It's us against them, right? Protect and serve. And then it's they have to arm themselves against the community because their job is not to protect the community. Their job is to enforce and harass that community. They've been talking about one of the moms who went in to rescue her kids, and she's been getting harassed by the police. So, yeah. So, this is just so bad, everything that's been happening. Yeah, so I wanted to just talk about some details from ABC News about this massacre. So, just reading from their articles, right? While testifying before a Texas State Senate committee on June 21st, McCraw said that Ruiz, who was a police officer, tried to save his wife, but was barred from doing so. Quote, we've got an officer, Officer Ruiz, whose wife called in and said she'd been shot and was dying. McCraw told the State Senate committee, quote, "What happened to him was he tried to move forward in the hallway. He was detained, and they took his gun away from him and escorted him off the scene." So, and I think that was in reference to one of the officers, the notorious image of the officer checking his phone. Like, he's literally, like, pointing the gun at his phone. Like, so great muzzle control there. But, Officer Ruben Ruiz, who was checking his phone, who had a Punisher logo on his wall screen. Great irony there. Yeah, he was, I don't know, like, it's just so crazy to, like, see this stuff. So, yeah, his wife was texting him, or I guess called him, saying that she got shot, and then he's just, like, on the scene, like, trying to figure out what to do, because he's got orders, and his orders are to stay put, but then he has to find his wife, because his wife is literally, like, and he probably knows which room his wife is in also, or is it, one of those rooms, right? So he's like, again, it's just so, and then they fucking detained him and escorted him off the scene. Like, wow, it's just so ridiculous. And then, you see all the photos and the images of the officers with their shields. Like, they had everything ready to go in that room. They did. And they just sat there. And again, I'm sure y'all seen also the release of this image. They put a note saying that the sounds of children screaming were edited out. Because, of course, when you hear of kids getting murdered and they're screaming, that is, a skin-crawling experience. And yet, they just stood there. They just stood there, checking their phones. Well, I mean, of course, with this officer, he was checking for updates on his wife. But still, again, the fact that he was on the scene, he didn't just go in. Or, I mean, he would have, he probably wouldn't have ended out well for him alone. But still, it's just, like, the lack of urgency and the lack of, action. That's what's more alarming. Again, like literally, like, minutes when, like, in the security footage, within minutes of the gunman getting in the school, there was, like, almost a dozen officers ready to respond. Like, they were there in the hallway. And then they just, like, and then they stood there for 77 minutes. And they just, like, man, wow. And again, there is screen caps of some officers, like, smiling and joking for whatever reason. I mean, again, it might be like a trauma response or whatever, because, I mean, people act differently in chaotic situations. But, like, again, like, these people should not have been in that situation. They were clearly not qualified to handle that situation. I mean, this is the thing about most cops and the police in general. These guys are just losers. They're fucking losers. And that's why they have to fight so hard to keep their jobs. That's why they have to put so much propaganda against abolish the police, talking points, because if they lose their jobs, they got nothing else. Like, what fucking job description do they got? Like, imagine them at an interview, just be like, oh, what are your skills and qualities? I can harass black people. I know how to use a gun. It's so, here's what I've, been theorizing, because if we actually did follow through with abolishing the police, like, these people would just go straight to private security for the rich, which, honestly would be a little more, like, at the very least, it would just be upfront about it, At least they wouldn't have to hide behind the whole public servant, veil, veneer, right? If they were just like, no, we're literally just mercenaries for the rich. Okay, at least it's honest. But, hey, these police, they got those children killed. I mean, wow, man. And again, like, when it comes to the actual, like, killing of the gunman, it was like a federal tactical team that just acted on its own initiative. Like, they didn't have the orders to do it. Wow, it's just so bad. Let me see what else from here. One of the children in Mireles' classroom called 911 during the rampage and pleaded with the dispatcher, send help for my teacher, she is shot but still alive. Police eventually breached the classroom and killed the gunman 77 minutes after he entered the school, but it was too late to save Mireles and the 20 other victims, officials said. Mireles was a fourth grade teacher at the elementary school, relatives told ABC News, and she had been a teacher in the school district for approximately 17 years. Amber Ibarra, a cousin of Ruiz, called Mireles a hero and an amazing mom. Quote, She was very adventurous and courageous and vivacious and could light up a room. Ibarra told ABC News she's going to be missed. And so they were talking about Mireles, who was a teacher, the partner of this officer. So yeah, man, it's really tragic. I mean, like, there was another teacher, and like her husband suffered a heart attack. So like there was also collateral fatalities from this massacre because, yeah, this is just a heart-wrenching experience. And, you have your partner or your life partner ripped away from you. One morning, you're just like, you wake up, kiss your partner goodbye, and then that's the last time you ever see them, and they get killed. And it's just like, so, one of the husbands of the other teacher, he suffered a heart attack. So, like, their kids are now orphans, just like that. Just, wow, tragic. But yeah, this community is in pain, They're in real pain, and there has been a press conference because of this leaked footage, because they're understandably upset. At the same time, it's like this information has to come out to the public. Like, people need to know what happened. So yeah, unfortunately, there is like a feeling of invasion of privacy for these families and their victims, their children, but the police were trying to hide this. The city government was trying to hide this. They did not want this to get out, and somebody had to get it out. So, that's the transparency we needed. So, again, I'm sympathetic to the victims of the families, but this footage had to get out. This information had to get out, and the world needs to see this stuff, because this is what the police are about, man. They're cowards. They just stood around and, like, literally, like, as I said, like, you could not write that. But you couldn't, because people would just say no. Of course people would respond. Of course the police would have some urgency. Again, we're just in a crazy situation. So, yeah. Wow, man. And again, the Texas Department of Safety, like, they're, again, the state government, they're just like, they're pretty much upfront about it, saying that this is a failure. This is an abject failure. They're very upset with the city police changing their story, and wow, man, this is so bad. And again, I'm told that, like, I can't have firearms because the police will protect me. They couldn't save these fucking kids, and then you want to tell me, oh yeah, no, they'll help you, they'll save you. Please get out of here, man. So yeah, but that's a whole different conversation. But so we're talking about new details about this shooting from Uvalde and the massacre there, and also questions about the motivations behind this maniac with a gun, why he would do such a thing. Again, yeah, because it's so tragic and so monstrous. It's like, who does something like this? Who goes out and just say, yeah, I'm gonna kill babies, I'm gonna shoot them in the face? Like that is clearly not a normal person, a normal human being. But right now we're living in a time where people are alienated and estranged, and this is particularly going to affect young men with, like, very little prospects in life. And again, because you want to have that, or you want to talk about, like, material and socioeconomic conditions as to why people might feel alienated, and then also just a larger issue of, is this like human nature? Is this sort of thing like learned? Like, so there's so many questions at hand, and I'm not the type of person to just believe that, people are naturally born like this, that they're just, or they'll say either like it's human nature to be cruel, or at the very least that humans are born as a blank template. And so it just depends on the influences, and there's certainly arguments to be made about that. Again, though, like, when you look at babies, normally they're pretty, like, loving and caring, and of course they are like sponges, but at the very least, like, they're not necessarily cruel in that sense. And when you do see young kids who do act out, who do at least exhibit, like, psychopathic tendencies, a lot of the times it is learned. A lot of the times, I mean, not to say, like, there aren't instances where a kid grows up in a totally normal, functional environment and they still exhibit violent tendencies. That does happen. But, again, I look at a kid and I'm like, is this gonna turn into a monster? No, because generally speaking, kids are kids. Sure, they might act out in certain ways. They're kids, and so they have to be disciplined properly. Of course, you don't want to use physical, or verbal abuse, or it's so complex learning at like cognitive development of kids, and then like how that affects their upbringing in adolescence and into adulthood, because that's like the very start. That's like everything that kid is going to be is in those years, from like basically birth to like maybe 5 years old. Like that, those are critical years, and it just keeps growing on that. And when you learn details about these mass shooters, a lot of the times it is they come from very dysfunctional backgrounds, really dysfunctional upbringings, divorced parents, or substance abuse, mental health issues, sometimes like sexual abuse. Again, like nobody, like there's very few instances of like these mass shootings coming from like truly stable, healthy backgrounds, where like the parents do, like, again, because like suburban life is so like it's a truly different way to live. So like, things might look picture perfect, but then there's like some really deep dark undercurrents. But yeah, kids who grow up in like really difficult, dysfunctional, toxic homes, they're most likely going to become alienated and estranged, become social outcasts, and then they fall into online radicalization, such as 4chan and some like really deep subreddits in Reddit. And so, yeah, man, we're just seeing now. So I'm really we're really just talking about this other mass shooting in Highland Park with this guy named Crimo, who was also a bit of an underground rapper. He's a failed rapper called Awake, and so he had a pretty underground digital footprint, posting this stuff. Like, it was so obvious who this guy was. Like, he had like his own like music videos, and then like he would put in like little images of just like literal massacres, like literal like drawings of him killing people. So it's like, okay, so this guy's pretty on the nose, saying that he wants to commit a mass shooting. But yeah, there's also questions about just like where was he getting radicalized? Because again, like there's some really deep undercurrents on 4chan, and I'm singling them out because like as much as I like seeing some like green tech stuff from 4chan, like it's pretty clear that that's a hotbed for alt-right radicalization. And so yeah, man. So I'm reading from NPR, and so they're talking about mass shooter culture on the internet and how this underground radicalization is affecting young men, and how it could inspire them to commit mass shootings after mass shootings. Because again, it's like it's the same. Again, I don't want to like profile a particular group of people, but you see the same thing over and over again. It's typically young men who are alienated, who are estranged, who are terminally online, or who become nihilistic. And again, there might be political considerations, like they're particularly white supremacist in nature. But again, this does affect other, ethnic groups, you could say. But yeah, it's like you see the same profile. You see 18 to 20-year-old young guys who got nothing else in life going on with them, who are black-pilled, nihilistic. They don't value life, human life. Or at the very least, because you read some of these manifestos and it's literally like they just want to dominate. They just want to fill in that void of alpha energy, right? Because certainly there's a lot of these mass shooter types who do subscribe to alpha male, beta cuck stuff, like whatever. It's just like, yeah, man, it's it's interesting. So again, this is from NPR, and they're talking about mass shooter culture. So researchers have combed through Crimo's digital footprint, saying the content is strikingly unoriginal. Quote, "It's just like a Zoomer spin on Zoomer trends and mass murders that have already been done before," said Sarah Hightower, using a term that refers to members of Gen Z. Hightower is an independent researcher focused on the extreme far right and online cultic movements. For example, Hightower noted one video that showed a cartoonized version of the suspect with a long gun in a bloody confrontation with law enforcement officers. Quote, he's not the first mass shooter to animate himself into a Columbine massacre type animated video. Hightower said a man who committed a mass murder suicide at a grocery store in Pennsylvania in 2017 did the same. Extremism researchers said the suspect's online content offers to the public a carefully curated persona that fits with an image of mass shooters styled on the killers in the 1999 Columbine School Massacre. They said this image has come to hold a portion of young people in certain online communities enthralled. Quote, it's actually very comparable to Hillary Clinton referring to Trump supporters as, quote, deplorables. And the thing that happened was that they then chose to embody that label and wore it on their hats and t-shirts, and it became a proud in-group label. She said Emmy Conley, an independent researcher of far-right extremist movements, digital propaganda, and online subcultures. Quote, similarly, the way that we have previously talked about lone actor violence and that they are mentally ill, they're confused, they aren't part of anything, they are schizophrenic young men off doing their own thing, distinct from any other group of actors, they started to embody that. Conley said this purposeful embodiment of an almost cartoonized version of a mass shooter is intended to play a, quote, known aesthetic of what such an individual looks like in the popular imagination, and also to claim the brand of being a mass shooter. Quote, Crimo doesn't fit into an individual ideology because ideology is irrelevant in this case, said Conley. The thing that starts to tie this type of violent actor to other types of violent actors is not ideological, it is aesthetic. So, yeah. So there are very real instances of, these mass shooting types having very clear political and ideological motivations. So like with the Buffalo mass shooting, the guy wrote a manifesto saying clearly white people are being replaced, and this is very clearly what great replacement talking points. And then also what we see here with other mass shootings, it's just completely nihilistic and dehumanized, and it's just simply kill. And again, right, it's the aesthetic. Again, these guys are losers, to put it lightly, and so they have nothing else to offer. So it's like kind of like that love and fear, like you see like with the boys, Homelander coming to this realization that, his alternate persona coming to speak with him. He's like, you're focused too much on being loved, and maybe you should lean into the fear and hate because that's what you're really good at. So yeah, it's like, I guess that kind of, again, and I say like the boys and Homelander deliberately because a lot of these like far right lunatics, they're just now starting to realize, wait, he's the bad guy? Like, oh my goodness, man. This is fucking ridiculous, bro. They look at a guy like that and they, clearly identify with it in some way. But, it's just like, hello, like media literacy is important, guys. Like, I bet these are the same people who listen to Rage Against the Machine and then they realize, wait, these guys are communists? What? It's just like, oh my God. Again, yeah, people are doing that online for some reason. So continuing further, when they talk about the aesthetics, over ideology, the visual language that Crimo used in his curated online presence included elements that researchers say is common with a particular young online subculture. It includes neon or strobe lights and quick cuts between video scenes accompanied by techno lo-fi music. Newhouse also stated that Crimo's seemingly chaotic and random selection of memes and images echoed what he's seen with suspects in other mass shootings, such as the ones in Uvalde, Oxford, Michigan. Quote, it's all designed to be one, shared, two, completely incomprehensible to anyone like us who are looking on to it, and three, to be a way of breaking down a person's natural reluctance to commit violence, said Newhouse. It is designed to break a person's brain. Conley added that the fixation on aesthetic also extends to how would-be shooters in their online milieux consider the optics of their attacks. Quote, every mass shooting that has been committed with an AR-15, somewhere it was a little bit about doing mass shooting with the AR-15 because that is the mass shooter weapon, not because it was the most effective weapon, she said. There have been so many mass shootings now that it is a performance art. There is a particular way you do it. There's a particular way you look. So, yeah, there's just like, it's just, yeah, murder. It's just what it is. It's just completely dehumanizing. So this is a pretty interesting article. Let's see here. Also, they talk about possible ways to intervene on this. So experts worry that gaps in understanding the conditions that contribute to this kind of mass shooting, as well as legal limitations, could hinder efforts to prevent future similar attacks. Quote, "It's not hard to figure out where different violent spaces are," said Connolly. "What's hard is what you do once you find one, if the red flag still falls within free speech territory. Because currently we have no intervention abilities, we only have law enforcement. The complexity and nuance of these subcultures and how they interact with each other also presents a challenge for parents who are eager to keep their kids from falling into these online activities. The age group at particular risk," Newhouse said, "are 13 to 24-year-olds, primarily male." Quote, if someone doesn't even understand the subculture, how are they going to effectively intervene?" Hightower asked. Still, Newhouse said he believes technology companies working with journalists, experts, and the public can mitigate the problem through content moderation. He and other experts agreed that Cremo should not be viewed as an outlier, and that need for common understanding of these mass shooter profiles will only be more urgent. Quote, "He's not going to be the only one, I can tell you that right now," Hightower said. "You'll see more and more of young boys and men like Cremo popping off. It's not just going to be neo-Nazis and terrorists." So, yeah, it's just... yeah, we just have a whole generation of young guys who are just alienated and just completely disconnected, and they're getting radicalized because it's just like, they just lean into the fear. Like, these are people who have no connection, no community. And again, a lot of it is on them because, like, there's very real, like, ties to, like, misogyny and racism, just complete psychotic, violent behavior. So again, like, these are very toxic spaces, and what these online communities do is that it turns into an echo chamber and a feedback loop, and they all just like, yeah, they just feed into this mindset of, yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's bad. I mean, again, when you think about the creation of the internet, like, do you think that these inventors were thinking, yeah, like they had all these hopes and aspirations of, like, yes, we'll connect people like never before all around the world, and this will be a digital library of Alexandria, all the information on the world. And then soon enough, you find out, oh wait, people are like doing dark web trading of like weapons and drugs and trafficking child pornography, and now we have young men forming online communities, basically like openly planning terrorist attacks. Of course, I say terrorist attacks loosely because, as they're saying, there's no broader ideology. It's an aesthetic. They're just, but again, it's like a nihilistic sort of extremism. I believe that's what they're calling it now. It's just like, yeah. So this is something to pay attention to. And of course, given myself, I'm a person who's online a lot. And I'm certainly speaking to whoever's listening to this, because I'm willing to bet you're also terminally online. It's just something to keep an eye out for. Because like, there'll be times where like, I'm just like browsing like random YouTube recommendations, and I'll see like a video, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a nice video, and then it's like portrayed as like, say, like a history sort of subject, but then it turns very quickly into like this Hyperborean, like fucking alt-right white supremacist like propaganda video, and it's just like, why do I keep getting recommended this shit? What the fuck? Like, it's very pervasive. Yeah, man, it's very pervasive. I mean, these algorithms, they don't do the best job filtering it out. And of course, it's like, it's treated as like, well, no, because we have to take a step back because we don't want to censor, right-wing, content. But then it's like, the right-wing content is like literal, like, neo-Nazi, like, propaganda. Like people who like are obsessed over like Wehrmacht. They're aware of Wehrbu, right? But of course, it's very obviously a whitewashing of German war crimes, and oh, you see, they're just nationalistics, and they're just they're patriotic, serving their it's very pervasive. So that's just one angle of it, and again, that's very much tied with ideology of Nazism and white supremacy. But we're also saying now the nihilism, the just complete abandonment, misanthropy, right? Abandonment of any kind of humanity, of the aesthetic. Yeah, man, this is a new age of extremism, as they're saying. So That's what we're talking about with mass shootings. And of course, living in America, we're just gonna see more of this stuff. And again, in fact, I've been reading into Marx's theory of alienation, so it'll be very, very interesting to take it's very surface level understanding right now as I'm diving into it, but it'll be very interesting to apply his understanding of alienation, especially in our postmodern world, and how this might contribute into this acts of violence. Because again, these are people who are alienated and estranged and just detached, and then they just commit acts of violence like this with complete inhumanity. Why is that happening? We've never seen this type of killings ever. Yeah. So anyway, so that's what we're talking about with those mass shootings, but also relating to other violent incidents in the U.S. We're talking about. I was talking earlier about the police response and just police in general. So now we're talking about the shooting that happened in Akron concerning Jayland Walker, who the autopsy report says was shot over 40 times. When you watch the video, they executed him. It was a firing squad. They just unloaded on this guy. And they're again, because the police, they have their story and they say Jayland shot the pursuing officers during the chase, and they said he had a gun in his car. Okay, whatever. They're always going to say some shit like that. And then meanwhile, this kid, Crimo, who did the Highland shooting, he got taken in pretty easily. They just took him. Again, you see the video and it's very clear that they just executed him. Anyway, because again, we can talk all day about the proper response of the police, but come on, man. You see the way that they shot this guy, and you see even you hear the voice of some of these officers, and they're like, boo, no, they're yelling, they're like, stop right there, they're pumped up, man, and so they just unload. And then we're in this situation, and then not only that, we're seeing also the response of the police in Akron against these protesters. I mean, it's it was very much swept under the rug by mass media. You barely hear the story in mass media, and there's a whole city that's literally under martial law, under a paramilitary occupation. And I'm hearing stories about other people who were related to other police victims, and yeah, man, and they're getting harassed by police. You have officers it's just crazy just hearing different stories about this. So I just want to read the autopsy report concerning this, and this is from a local station, WKYC. So authorities continue their investigation into the deadly Akron police shooting of Jayland Walker. The Summit County medical examiner announced new details regarding the autopsy report Friday morning. Dr. Lisa Kohler outlined the injuries to Walker's body, which include 46 entrance graze wounds, as follows. So 17 gunshot wounds injured the pelvis and upper legs, causing internal injuries to the right iliac artery, a major artery going to the leg, the bladder, and fracture to the pelvis and both upper leg bones, the femurs. Then 15 gunshot wounds inside the torso, including internal injuries to the heart, lungs, liver, spleen, left kidney, intestines, and multiple ribs. 1 bullet stuck in the face and fractured the jaw. 8 gunshot wounds injured the arms and right hand. 5 gunshot wounds injured the knees, right lower leg, and right foot. Dr. Kohler noted that some of the wounds are on extremities. Quote, I can't say for certain whether wounds passed through an arm and then into the body or not, she said. There is that possibility. I can't say anything different than that we've got 46 entrance and graze wounds. Dr. Kohler also said that toxicology screening was negative for drugs and alcohol. So, it wasn't like he was smoking, because if he was, that would have been in his system. So he had no drugs, no alcohol. Quote, Jayland Walker's death was due to blood loss from his internal injuries, Dr. Kohler said. Quote, the cause of death ruling was multiple gunshot wounds. The manner of death was ruled homicide, shot by others. Our ruling of homicide is a medical ruling, meaning the death at the hands of another. It is not a legal conclusion. So that's from the doctor. As they're saying, it's just he got murdered, but that's not a legal thing because, you know, it's the police, and the police can kill people whenever they want. Let's see what else. Yeah. So, and this is from a statement from the Walker family's legal team. They said, quote, "Today, Summit County Medical Examiner report on Jayland Walker's death confirms the violent and unnecessary use of force by the Akron Police Department on an unarmed young man who, as the family expected, was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. That Jayland suffered 46 gunshot wounds to his body is horrific. The fact that after being hit nearly 4 times, the officer still handcuffed him while he lay motionless and bleeding on the ground is absolutely inhumane. The family is devastated by the findings of the report and still await a public apology from the police department." So yeah, they handcuffed him and they just left him to die. That's what they do. They shoot you dead and then they just leave you to bleed out. Like I've read testimonies online from like paramedics, and it's just like the cops are like, no, like I'm not gonna yeah, it's just like, dude, like you hear reports from like paramedics and fire department people and how the police are just like completely useless. Like they're just absolutely useless. Walker, who was laid to rest Wednesday, was shot and killed nearly 3 weeks ago on June 27th when 8 Akron police officers opened fire amid an overnight chase. Police say Walker had fired a shot at one point during the vehicle pursuit, but was unarmed at the time officers opened fire as the chase continued on foot. The gun was later found in Walker's vehicle. A portion of downtown Akron remains under an overnight curfew, which Mayor Don Horrigan said first ordered July 4th amid damage to some businesses during protests. So yeah, they killed him, and this wasn't a guy who was using drugs or alcohol. I mean, they just said it. He didn't have it in his. There wasn't anything in his system, and now of course they are saying that he fired on them in the police chase. Which I mean, like, it's just like, again, at this point, I just don't believe the police at all. Like, I just don't. I don't believe you. they found a gun, okay, and then for what? Like, what did he even get pulled over for? Like, there's no details about him, like, having any warrants or, like, what the fuck? It's just like, why did they pull him over for? This guy wasn't using drugs or anything. There's no, like, again, the police would be all over that. They would make that, like, in all these reports, they would have been saying, oh, he had a prior arrest warrant or some kind of, he was, like, they haven't released anything about that. And, of course, his family's doing what they can to give him justice. So, again, you know, I don't care about the cops anymore. I don't fucking care. And And, you know, again, you see the response. This is reading again from the WKYC, studio. They're saying now that the police no longer are wearing name tags because they're getting threats. So this is what they do. They commit a murder, and then they're like, oh, why are you getting upset with us? And then like now they're just removing name tags, and it's just like, dude, it's just like, my goodness, man. They double down every time. They double down, and they get more strict and harder because they did something wrong and the public is wanting justice, and then they will respond with more violence because that's the only thing that they can do, because they're here to occupy us and dominate. That's their whole strategy. Again, man, like, I go about my day, and then sometimes I'll pick up an order at a restaurant, and there'll be like a cop, like literally, like, I guess he's just milling about, but it's just like, I see a cop, I'm already on edge, and I'm just like, let me get the fuck out of here, because again, like, these fucking cops are just like, yeah, man, it's just like, I don't know, man. Yeah, so anyway, so reading further about Akron. So during Thursday's press conference to address the police officer involved in the fatal shooting of 25-year-old Jayland Walker, Akron Police Chief Steve Milett was asked about reports that officers in the city are no longer wearing badges or name tags. And while Milett said that officers are still wearing badges, he did admit that he has instructed officers to remove their name tags due to threats stemming from Walker's shooting. Quote, every officer is wearing a badge. I authorized them to take their name tags off because of the threats that were made against our officers and the bounties that were placed on officers' heads. Again, like, who is placing bounties? Like, who the fuck? Like, and again, like what basis do they have for that, first off? And secondly, like, hey, maybe, you wouldn't have threats against your officers if you weren't executing people in the street. My goodness. So he continued, quote, "People were getting their names off of their uniforms, getting on social media and elsewhere, and going into our Facebook page here in the police department to identify, get a picture, send that picture and that image out into the public. In some instances, they got family photographs and put it out on social media. Because of the threats that were made against our officers, I authorized them to take off their name tags." Which, again, they might take off the name tags, but they're still going to be, hey, they still have a face. So, they can still, do a lot with that. So guess what's going to happen? They're going to start covering their faces because you see, there's threats against police officers and people are hunting them down on social media. So now we have to, this is literally the Watchmen. Literally Watchmen from the new series. They had to cover their identities because people were attacking police. Oh, here we go. My goodness. Yeah, man. Again, remember during the George Floyd riots, they had unmarked military officials guarding the Lincoln Memorial. Again, they went to such extreme methods to respond to basically college kids, wanting some justice for a very clear murder. And look at the response that they did for that. But then anytime there's a far right wing, protest that instigates further into a riot, we're just so caught off guard. Oh, well, we just didn't. We're outnumbered and we can't respond to this. But then when it's college kids, so-called left-wing radicals, the stormtroopers are out, right? And of course, we see this here. The community, they have bounties on the officers' heads, and of course, they want to characterize the non-violent protesters as the ones putting bounties on their heads instead of saying maybe this is just some gangsters on the street. But they want to say that is involved with BLM and other anti-police protests. It's always some street stuff that has nothing to do with the protest movement, and they try to characterize that as being either aligned or sympathetic or just literally no, they're the same. So yeah, as I said, they can remove the name tags, but then they're still going to, a lot of these people, they can still do facial recognition stuff, and they can get a lot just from the officers' faces. So they're going to start covering up the officers' faces to protect their identity, quote, protect their identity. And wow, what a surprise. When they start covering up their faces and covering their identities, they become more violent and more extreme in their methods because they're literally the whole purpose, a lot of that equipment, a lot of that gear is to basically, it's psychological. So you see those stormtroopers out with their gear, basically a medieval warrior basically, and it's just that's meant to be a fear tactic. Again, a lot of these officers, it's just complete brute force because they're always deployed against non-violent, unarmed civilians. Yeah, so anyway, so reading further, Millett said that any officer who is asked for his identity or his or her identity information is directed to provide their employee number, and if the person was not satisfied with that, his supervisor would be summoned to the scene to deal with the situation. The fatal shooting of Walker has led to protests and demonstrations in Acorn, which intensified after the city released body cam footage of the June 27th incident on July 3rd, showing 8 officers opening fire on Walker. The incident began with officers attempting to pull over Walker's car for a traffic and equipment violation before he proceeded to lead officers on a high-speed chase down East Talmadge Avenue towards State Route 8. At some point during the pursuit, police said Walker fired a gun out of the window of the car. Among the footage released on July 3rd was a traffic video that showed a flash coming out of Walker's car. They say is consistent with the gunshot. Following the 6-minute-long chase, Walker exited on Wilbeth Road near the Bridgestone Tire offices while wearing a black ski mask. The footage shows officers attempting to deploy non-lethal tasers before firing their guns and striking Walker, who was unarmed at the time of the shooting. While Horgan couldn't confirm how many shots were fired at Walker, he said that he expected the number to be high, and that the initial medical reports showed that he had 60 bullet wounds. So now they clarified and said it was 46, but they were certainly firing more than that. But yeah, the police said that they fired their guns because Walker made a motion that caused them to fear for their lives. Millett said that while it is difficult to see in real time viewing of the video, screen captures from the footage show Walker making multiple movements, including Walker moving his hand to his waist area, turning toward the officers and making a forward motion with his arms. that he said that each officer involved believed that Walker was moving into a firing position. A gun, magazine round, and gold wedding ring were found in the passenger seat of Walker's car. Millett said the officers attempted to perform life-saving aid at the scene before Walker was pronounced dead. Which they said that they did that, but they also reported that he was handcuffed. So, like, how were they performing life-saving? Like, they just handcuffed him, so that's not life-saving. Per department policy, each officer involved has been placed on paid administrative leave. 7 of the 8 officers involved were white, and none had previously faced work-related discipline. Walker is black. Yeah, that's what they've been releasing, and they've been talking about. And again, that's just the situation that we're at with this police violence. Again, they said it was for a traffic and equipment violation. It doesn't appear that he had warrants on him, so who knows why he ran like that and why he led them on a high-speed chase. Again, man, fear gets the better of people. I mean, you're very scary to talk to police, especially in the traffic stop. Again, it's like he probably ran because he knows the police in that area and he knows that they harass people like that. So who knows? There's so many reasons like that because people get afraid around cops. It's fear. Every time they elicit fear. And that's the way that they perform and that's the way that they operate is very much based on domination. It's very much based on just brute strength, just coming in and just like controlling the situation. I don't know if any of you have lived in really dysfunctional situations where there's stuff popping off and then somebody says, oh, the police are on the way. Every time the situation gets worse because now the police are coming and people know, oh shit, now things are going to get really bad so I don't know, man. It's just, Again, because when I think about law enforcement and, when I think about peacekeeping, right? Because, I mean, on some basic level, you're going to need peacekeepers or police to keep the peace. But, the reason we have these crime issues is because of poverty, okay? That's a lot of the reasons why we have these crime issues. Again, we're talking about materialism, right? People are going to resort to crime and drugs and such because, you tell them to get a job and then, already they're in a community that has underfunded public schools, so they don't have the same education as somebody grown in an area that is relatively prosperous and that at least has good education systems, actual job opportunities. So, and then also you have to consider, what they're born into, those circumstances. Because a lot of time people resort to, organized crime because that's just what the family does. It's a family business, just like anything else. So, it's a very complex issue when you're talking about crime, right? And what drives people to commit these sort of things. But, at the same time, when it comes to America, it's on purpose. We purposely create these environments where they can't do anything else except this drug trade or whatever crime, business. And the police are there to respond to that, to attack minority communities of color. I mean, again, we look at white flight and we look at communities where there was a strong black middle class and then they moved into areas where it was predominantly white and then the white people leave. And then what a surprise, when the white people leave, the area just falls under because the city doesn't really care about, this is just the black area and they redline it. And then you look at areas like Compton and Detroit in the 40s and 50s, there was a true strong middle class, truly strong areas. And then over time, they just grow dilapidated because the factories start outsourcing cheap labor and then they have nothing else to go on to do. And it falls apart because there's no job opportunities because it's being deliberately sabotaged by the city. And then in the 80s, with the, smuggling of drugs, crack and such, heroin, these communities just fall under because there's nothing else to do except do drugs. Because, I mean, what the fuck? They're just living in absolute, misery and poverty. And, again, we can talk all day about that. But it's just it's a conspiracy. They deliberately sabotage these communities so then they can say, aha, you see, these areas are violent and they can't tear the community, and that's why we have to increase our budget, and that's why we have to, like, notice that, like, you see, like, the violent homicide rate, it's actually, like, of course, with this lockdown pandemic, there was a bit of a spike, but it's still relatively low compared to, like, the 70s and such, where people were all about law and order. It's still relatively low. And still, like, the police are all just like, oh no, because we need more budgets and we need more stuff. And yeah, man, yeah, it's not good. It's a conspiracy. I mean, they want those numbers to show, hey, crime is getting worse. Give us more money. And then, of course, these suburbanites, they fall for it every time. They don't move to improve the conditions, the material conditions. Instead, they just double down with police because, oh, well, they're here to protect us. And that's not true at all. But yeah, so we're going to continue, and we're going to talk about some developments mainly in Texas. And so just wanted to talk about, this recent tragedy that happened in San Antonio, considering these migrants trying to get into the U.S. And so they were stuck in this trailer and they suffocated to death. Almost, about 50 migrants died. And so it's a pretty gruesome situation. This isn't the first instance. This happened, similar instance in 2017. It was kind of like, because I was in San Antonio in UTSA, and I was in there for a bit, then had to transfer out. And not even like a week after I left San Antonio, they had a similar situation where almost a dozen people were killed in a trailer. And I think even it was at a Walmart that I had been around. So I can't get the full details because it was in a Walmart parking lot. So I need to find if it was at that same Walmart that I went to. But just the thought of that is really disturbing, because then it's I was probably around that. There were people in that trailer and just dying, and yeah, it's messed up, man. So again, I don't want to think about that, but just talking about this tragedy that happened with migrants getting killed. And so what they're saying is that 22 of the deceased were from Mexico, 7 from Guatemala, and 2 from Honduras. And so they're still trying to identify the others. Quote, so another one of these incidences that happens until immigration policies change, until something gives, then unfortunately we're going to see a lot more of these events happening, said Cesar Espinoza, executive director of FIEL, an immigration rights advocacy group. Our immigration laws are so strict and stringent, and yet people want to get in. They want to get in here because they're living in Central America and they don't really have the best opportunities. And places like El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, they have really violent gang problems, and they can't stay there. Literally, if you don't comply with the gangs, because they try to recruit people, and if you don't work with them, they'll just kill you. They'll kill you and your family. It's really bad. And so they have to come to the U.S. because otherwise they'll get killed. And then they have to trek all through this, these jungles and deserts, and they have to dodge these human traffickers and the violent narco cartels. And these people, they just want to come to America to work. That's it. They just want to work, right? This is the immigrant American dream, and yet they have to fight for their lives just to get here. And then, they fucking die in these trailer vans, and then you have Greg Abbott and all these conservatives are talking you see, this is an issue with the open border policy, which is not true at all. Biden just struck a deal with Mexico to these Democrats, they talk about, oh, well, you see, because the Republicans are anti-immigrant, and then they also double down with border control. They haven't gotten those kids out of those camps, they have them in those detention centers. You see some of these images of people just cramped up in these rooms, these cells, and a lot of them have been dying from infectious diseases, flu, COVID. This is again, this is a very real case to be talking about genocide here, because, and again, you hear this even from liberals as well when we talk about like opening the border. Oh no, but you see, because we can't just have all these immigrants coming here, and like they're not so upfront about it as Republicans are, because at least Republicans are like upfront saying like, no, because there will be demographic changes and there will be again, white replacement. Liberals, they're a little more tentative about it, so they're not so upfront saying it will be a demographic change, but it's just like, why not? Why can't we have people come in and work? Because like these guys are doing the physical labor. They're doing they're in the construction, and they're in the fields, and they're happy to do it. They're willing to do it. These guys have a true work ethic. Like, you see some of these videos of these migrant workers, and they're like, they're on the same wavelength. They have a whole system going down, and they're happy to do the work. They don't complain. I mean, you want to talk about people who are truly pulling themselves by the bootstraps? Like, these migrant workers are doing it. And this is a consistent theme with America, where we have the exploitation of immigrant labor, low-wage labor. So say like, when it comes to like the railroad and the Industrial Revolution, you had like Irish and Chinese, immigrants being exploited and, just being disposable labor. Again, this is a consistent theme. Italians, Germans, coming to this country and then being exploited in these factories, right? The building of skyscrapers, right? Like same thing, and so we have it here with, our 21st century, this new migrant wave coming from the global south. And it's not just Central Americans. I mean, we have Venezuelans and Colombians. Well, not necessarily Colombians too much, but, people are coming to this country because the green card registration and visa requirements are so strict. And these people, they just want to come to America to work and, actually live out the American dream, or as they're being sold. And again, too, like, the people will talk about, oh yeah, see how these people, they come to our country because we have such great opportunities. Hey, maybe because our foreign policy creates environments where people are forced to flee their countries because we just completely loot them and completely exploit their financial system. Like, again, like countries like, they say Guatemala, like these are countries that have experienced coups and sabotage because they had governments that were trying to nationalize their natural resources and industries, and the CIA and sometimes MI6, they just prop up the military dictatorship. This happens all the time, so, the United States is destabilizing these regions, causing people to leave because they're living in just dilapidated and, just deprived conditions, and then they come to the U.S. and then stuff like this happens. Because they have to go through the coyotes and all these other smugglers, and they end up in situations like, there's report after report, that comes out of Houston, where like literally they have like whole apartments filled with like dozens of people, and it's like a whole human trafficking operation. Like, it's horrific. It's really bad. And also there was reports about some counties in Georgia doing literal slavery with these migrant workers and taking advantage of them, like basically like fleecing their wages so that like, they get paid, but then like they're provided room and board and food, so like they get their wages, but then like everything is fleeced out of it, so like they get like basically like pennies on the dollar, and like they have no choice. They can't, like, because they're not full citizens, and like their visas have been exploited, like they literally, like their documents like were seized by these businesses, and so like if they try to go to the proper authorities aren't going to go after the bosses. They're just going to deport the worker because, oh, well, he's illegal, just take him. Yeah, man. And I'm speaking as somebody who is Latino, and my grandmother came to this country as a maid of, so like, it's just like, it's so interesting when I hear like Hispanic people making the same talking points when it comes to this migrant, I guess, crisis. And I say crisis in quotations because it's just like, let these people come and let them work. They want to work. Like these, again, like they want to frame this migrant crisis, again, in quotations, as like, the encroachment of the cartels, which is a problem. I'm not saying that the cartels aren't going to be a problem, but a large reason why the cartels are having like so much business and why they're so strong, stronger than ever, is because the border keeps getting stricter and stricter. And so that's their business, is smuggling. So like the stricter the border becomes, the more that they can charge for, smuggling humans and drugs and weapons, because it's just like it's a supply and demand thing, and that's, again, like one of my favorite movies is Sicario, even though it's like fiction and it's kind of like outlandish at times. At the same time, though, the border is going to become militarized, increasingly militarized. We are going to see, hear reports of black ops operations, like involving like CIA and Delta Force, like in the movie. Like, the reason why the movie is so, for me, resonates so well is because that's where we're heading. That's exactly where we're heading. And also, there are parts of Mexico that are just under control of the cartel. So like this insurgency problem is going to get worse. Again, like the corruption in Mexico is startling, because you start to realize that like there are politicians and government agencies under different control of these cartels, and it becomes like a proxy war, and like it's a whole different like story to unpack. But yeah, at least talking about this migrant crisis. So I'm reading further, right, from this advocacy group, migrant advocacy group, quote, "If there are going to be jobs that are offered here that are maybe lower wages, or companies trying to take advantage of cheap labor from immigrants and things like that, it makes sense for there to be some sort of pathway for them to maybe come in, work, and maybe go back home." Quote, "Not only would this eliminate some of the tragedies that are happening, but it would also give a boost to the economy. People are able to travel back and forth, tickets and services back and forth, and we would see an impact to our economy. But more importantly, we would see a decrease in folks trying to enter the country illegally," Espinosa said. So, again, it's like, yeah, let these people come in and work, because like a lot of these people are just, they're workers, okay, campesinos, okay, they just want to come here and they want to work and they want to, make some money, and a lot of the times they send it back home, but again, it's very clear that they're being exploited as cheap laborers, and they're very much being used as a scapegoat. So they're talking about how, oh no, but if you have migrant laborers come in, then that's going to drive down wages. Okay, but whose fault is that? Is that the worker trying to provide for his family, or maybe the boss is explicitly taking advantage and trying to fleece wages and pit the workers against each other along racial lines? You see? So I'm just going to read it again also from this. They're talking about this Texas sheriff penning a letter to Biden about the migrant crisis. So let's see what they have to say. So the Bayar, which is pronounced Bexar, so it's, it looks like Bexar, but pronounced Bayar in Spanish, because San Antonio is a very Hispanic region. Right, so Bayar County Sheriff Javier Salazar has written a letter to President Joe Biden asking to meet with him to address migrant issues, or to address migration issues, quote, as the humanitarian crisis it truly is. Quote, "We just don't see it slowing down," Salazar told ABC News' Lindsay Davis Wednesday during an interview. Quote, "I attribute that to what I would call a perceived lack of action on the part of the federal government that's allowing the state of Texas to do what they're doing, which is quite frankly causing a whole lot of heartache for other agencies. I don't see a whole lot of benefit from it. We're dealing with big rescues of groups of undocumented immigrants every day," end quote. Salazar has called for action from the federal government in his most recent letter to Biden, stating how, quote, "angry he is. I am angry that I could not stop this massive loss of life in my county. I'm angry that despite my best efforts to appeal to your administration, I have not received a response. I'm disappointed that a perceived lack of action on the part of the U.S. government has allowed the governor of my state to use the issue as one big campaign does," Salazar wrote, and also alleged that Texas Governor Greg Abbott used the situation as some sort of enemy invasion. This comes after 53 people lost their lives during a suspected migrant smuggling operation Monday and the increasing migration at the border. This is, however, not the first time he has reached out to Biden asking for assistance, as a spokesperson for Salazar told ABC News. He has written 3 letters to Biden and has also reached out to Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. While he is hoping to have resources from the federal government and meet with Biden, Salazar, who is a Democrat, also puts blame on Abbott's migrant arrest program. Under this program, state law enforcement agencies are authorized to arrest migrants on criminal charges. This is something Salazar said he is not going to enforce, that he has not seen to be beneficial and referred to as a campaign stunt. Quote, "We have not experienced any change. In fact, it seems to be picking up steam. To me, it just seems like a big campaign stunt, that billions of dollars are being poured into it. And for what? We're sleeping out here in the desert, watching for this enemy invasion that never truly seems to come," Salazar said. Abbott's program has faced severe backlash, including from members of the Texas National Guard, who have been tasked with enforcing the measures. Salazar's most recent letter, he said, has received some response from the White House, but he still hopes to meet to discuss solutions. Quote, "I'm not just going to come to the table and present problems. I'm hoping to present some solutions. I've been in talks with other urban county sheriffs in the state of Texas, so we're prepared to come to present some possible solutions as we see it. We just need the audience," Salazar said, and is hopeful of a solution. Quote, "We may not have all the answers, but I think between those of us that are here and with eyes on the problem every day, those in D.C. that are the top decision makers, I think we can reach some sort of an understanding to try to truly make a difference in this situation, or this issue," Salazar said. So, okay, so as I was saying, because this is a county sheriff, and so he's, the Salazar, Sheriff Salazar, he's saying, talking about the president and also Greg Abbott, and just saying to the president that there's a lack of response, but also how Greg Abbott enforced this draconian measure of rounding up migrants isn't making the situation better. So I'm interested to see what measures, because he doesn't really talk about. He just says, "Oh, I want to go to the president and present solutions," but he doesn't really talk about what solutions he has in mind for, with the press. At the very least, if you want to, I'm just, is this solutions more border measures? I mean, or to, have working programs, as these advocacy groups are saying, have a working program for migrant workers, because again, you're not really going to stop people from coming into the U.S. I mean, in fact, we should encourage people coming to the U.S. Again, people are concerned about the declining population, declining birth rates, but then it's okay, well, then let the migrants come in, let them, settle in the U.S. And they get all flustered about that. Oh, no, because you see, this will change the cultural fabric. And it's just what a surprise. You're a great replacement theorist. So, again, my solution would be let them come in and let them work. If people want to go back to their country, go back and forth, fine. If people want to settle here and bring their families here, awesome. Why not? These people are going to work, and then we give them a proper life, actually, an actual American dream. Their kids, they go on to, go to, again, how many posts have we seen now of graduates who talk about, my parents came to this country, and then, they had a dream, and then, the kid goes on to be a lawyer or a doctor, and they're first generation Americans, stories like that, the actual American dream that these conservatives, they like to talk about. But then again, it's they'll talk about because again, there's a lot of conservatives who unironically talk about their grandparents, immigrant story. But then, when it comes to this migrant issue, oh no, but we have a migrant crisis. I mean, Ted Cruz, who's pretty big on this stuff, his dad is Cuban, okay? His dad is a Cuban guy. And, again, of course, white Cubans, they have a lot of benefits, from fleeing from a communist country. So, yeah, the white Cuban immigrant story is very different than the Central American migrant worker immigrant story, because it's a very different experience. So anyway, right. So again, we'll have to follow through and see if they actually meet. But again, it's just he didn't exactly present solutions to the press. He just said, "I just want to talk." But it's okay, but what solutions and programs are you talking about? Anyway, so there's that. And I also just wanted to talk about Texas some more, because we're having this conversation now because recently the Texas GOP, they met and they had this meeting with the party, and they basically presented their platform, and they're basically pushing the idea for secession. Kind of mentioned this in passing in the last episode, but I wanted to talk about this more because, again, this might be a nothing burger. At the same time, though, things are, evolving in a very different light, a very different way, and who knows, there could actually be a ballot for this issue. Like, and again, it's just so funny because we're living in Texas, and the ERCOT grid is talking about, and I'll highlight this more later in the episode, but they're talking about, the energy issues that we're having in the summer heat, which is fucking ridiculous. Like, we can't have heat, we can't have energy during a blizzard, and we also can't get it through the winter heat. I mean, listen, even though the experts said that the grid wasn't winterized, like, it's like, okay, benefit of the doubt, because even if our grid was like properly winterized, we still would have had some issues. So again, of course, it was a tragedy, and like the official death toll is like just under 300, but there's some reports that go as high as 1,000. So like, it was a serious like disaster, and we nearly avoided like a full-on like blackout SHTF situation. So again, like, a lot of the folks I talk with, like, it's just like we missed a huge bullet. We didn't even miss a bullet. It's like a whole like howitzer shell, like, and it's just like you saw that like just zip by you, and you're just like, oh yeah, that's nothing. It's just like, are you fucking kidding me, bro? So yeah, man. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about this like secession, this idea of secession that could be seen on the general election ballot in 2023. So that's kind of like my deadline to get my degree. If I can follow through with it, I can get my degree within the summer of 2023, and then hopefully I can find a way out of this state, because if this actually follows through, I don't know, there could be some interesting developments. So, and again, it's just like, as I said, it's most definitely a nothing burger, but the fact that this is like a serious thing that they're talking about in the Republican GOP. So this is the state party. It's like, okay, I don't like where this is going. Again, so I'm reading from Newsweek, right? And so they're talking about Texas Republicans pushing for a referendum to decide whether the state should secede from the U.S. So continuing, the demand for Texans to be allowed to vote on the issue in 2023 was one of many measures adopted in the Texas GOP's party platform following last week's state convention in Houston. And this article came out June 20th. So some time has passed, but continuing. So under a section titled, quote, State Sovereignty, the platform states, pursuant to Article 1, Section 1 of the Texas Constitution, the federal government has impaired our right of local self-government. Therefore, federally mandated legislation that infringes upon the 10th Amendment rights of Texas should be ignored, opposed, refused, and nullified. Quote, Texas retains the right to secede from the United States, and the Texas legislators should be called upon to pass a referendum consistent thereto. And it's so ironic. They have a guy, who's this GOP guy talking about secession, and there's just a photo of him, like he's probably. These guys are so confused, man, because they're pro-Confederate, but then if they see you burning an American flag, they get like fucking rabid, It's like, I want to secede from the Union, but you better not disrespect this flag. It's just like, these people are so disconnected. Oh my God. It's just like, again, like, as I was talking further about like the aesthetic, right? A lot of times it's not ideology, it's aesthetic. Like, they were called deplorables, and then they latched onto that, so it's very much just contrarianism, just like, oh, everybody's for this, well, now I'm against it. It's just like they have nothing to latch onto. So, continuing, in another section on state governance, the platform states that Texas Republicans want the state legislature to pass a bill in its next session requiring a referendum in the 2023 general election for the people of Texas to determine whether or not the state of Texas should reassert its status as an independent nation. end quote. The myth that Texas can secede from the U.S. continues because of the state's history of independence. According to the Texas Tribune, Texas declared independence from Mexico in 1836 and spent 9 years as its own nation before becoming a U.S. state. Texas then seceded from the Union in 1861 before being readmitted following the end of the Civil War in 1870. And so, and that's the thing too with the Texas Revolution, because there's a lot of revisionism about that. So just a quick summary. So this was a Mexican territory, formerly Spanish territory, and then Mexico seceded or declared their independence. And so, Mexico had like a huge portion of the U.S. Okay, we forget that. Nearly half of the U.S. used to be Mexico. So like you see certain communities of Mexican Americans like in places like Nevada, Colorado, and it's just like, no, actually, like this was Mexico and they were living there, Anyway, but Texas was particularly during that time under Mexican occupation was particularly depopulated because of the Comanches. And so what the Mexican government decided was they allowed Americans to come into Texas to settle it so that they could become a buffer to the Comanche raids, because they couldn't really expand with their own settlers. So they just had the Americans come in, and then of course these white Americans came in and they brought their slaves, and Mexico abolished slavery. Well, there was also they also had to convert to Catholicism. So it wasn't like Mexico was entirely innocent, because like they had their own issues. Like the Texas Independence War, it wasn't just Texas. There was also Rio Bravo. So like there were other rebellions that sprung out, because there was like Santa Anna, and he was a bit of a strong man. So there were legitimate grievances, but a large part of it was the slavery, because the white people brought their slaves, and Mexico was like, no, we don't have slavery. And so that to them, for Texas, was a big thing, because like, oh no, we're keeping our slaves. And then, they basically were like, no, we want to revert to the old Constitution of Mexico, like 1824, the Mexican Constitution, which they were, that was their guise for independence. But really, it was, once independence was achieved, all the white people immediately betrayed the Tejanos. Like you read the story of Juan Seguin, and like he was a big figure in the fight for independence for Texas. And then once Texas gained independence, the white people fucked him over. And it's just like, it's very clear, very obvious, because like after independence was achieved, then there was a flood of white people all over America coming to Texas, because it's like free land. All right, yeah, just like, just take it. So yeah, man. And then similar events happened in California as well. Like those Chicanos, they were living, and then the white settlers came through, and they just took everything. Again, like you see like the Cholos in California, and the thinking is like, oh, these are Mexicans, but it's like, well, yeah, but they were living there. They're that. Yeah, you see, like, yeah. So anyway, so continuing, because there's a little history lesson about the Texas Republic and how it came to be. But bottom line is, white people came in, and then they just said, no, it's our thing. And then, and then like the admittance into the United States is what started the Mexican-American War. And then, of course, that's how we have California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah. Like, again, all that, like just half of the country was Mexico, and then white people took it. So, yeah. So continuing, the U.S. Constitution makes no provision for states to secede, and in 1869, the Supreme Court ruled in Texas versus White that states cannot unilaterally secede from the Union. Quote, if there wasn't any constitutional issue resolved by the Civil War, it is that there is no right to secede, the late Justice Antonin Scalia once wrote. So that's Scalia saying that. Like, again, even like some of these conservative like justices, like they would never like, no, like you can't secede. Like I remember even when I was in San Antonio, I had like a American politics professor who was very obviously right wing, and he would present secession like pamphlets in class, but he would say like, oh no, this is just a buddy of mine. It's just like, he's very obviously pushing that. But anyway, and even like I saw I went to a gas pump, I went to pump some gas in an HEB gas station, and I saw it. And they're calling it now Texit. And I saw it. Like somebody wrote in Sharpie, Texit 2023. So yeah, man. If I'm staying in Texas, I'm getting armed up because nah, man, because this is very obviously like a white supremacist insurrection. This is very much what's going to turn into, and there's going to be a very clear divide between urban centers and the rural areas because the urban centers are predominantly progressive and Democrat. So like Houston will never secede. They'll never allow that, and that's going to be a very interesting development. Also with San Antonio, that's a predominantly Hispanic Democratic area. So, yeah, man, this is going to be a very interesting development. What if they actually follow through with this? So, again, this is going to be pushed among the really fringe, far right elements, and yeah, man, they're gonna, if they don't get their way politically, they're gonna push some. But this is what I've been talking about. Like, I'm worried about violence in this state because you see what their intentions are. They're telling you straight up, like, hey, we want to secede and we are willing, like they are willing. Like, how else are you going to enforce secession without violence? Hello? So, yeah. So that's just a little, I guess just like a little touching up on that. There's a lot to unpack in this, last couple of weeks. And, it would be good to at least do a pretty long episode considering, I got classes and also this insurance online course to finish up. But again, I just wanted to talk about some stuff in Texas and what's happening there. And so also talking about, domestic economic circumstances, because now we're reaching a pretty critical moment economically. And, gas prices have been dropping, like gas prices at the station that I usually go to. It went as high as like $4.70 and now it's at $4.08. So it just dropped like that quickly. And it's very interesting that it just happened. Right? I thought Putin was, creating this gas supply crisis, and then all of a sudden, like, the gas prices almost drop $1. Very interesting. And I'm lucky to have it at $4.08 because there are places in the country that still have it over like $5 or $6. Like, it's bad. It's really rough. Yeah, and I work remotely too, so that's also a blessing. So I'm reading up from Market Watch, and they're talking about inflation percentages, and now they're predicting it to go as high as 9%. So it's almost like a 10th increase. Like everything, consumer goods have almost increased by a 10th. And still, it's just like, no. See, the problem is these kids. They're. It's funny. Like they're saying, oh no, these kids. They're getting avocado in Starbucks too much. And now we're also seeing articles saying, no, you see this generation. They're stingy and they don't spend. And so like. They're pitting the blame on the millennial generation, who has the lowest share of wealth like ever. Like you look at the percentages of other generations before, we have the lowest share of ownership. Like we're a huge renter class. And like, again, like you hear people talk, you say like, hey, people are stuck renting and people don't really have home ownerships. Well, just buy a house. Like that's so, like literally, like sometimes I'll have conversations and like it's deranged the way that people talk to you. It's just like, yeah, just buy a house. And just like, you are so detached from reality just for making a comment like that. Like, wow. Yeah, it's a interesting time that we're living in. So reading from Market Watch. So the biggest influence in U.S. inflation in 40 years, or has it reached a peak? Not yet. Consumer prices rose sharply again in June, and the yearly increase in the cost of living might surge to as high as 9%. The Consumer Price Index is expected to show a large 1.1% jump in June. When the report is released Wednesday morning, the CPI comes out at 8:30 a.m. The increase in inflation over the past year, meanwhile, is forecast to climb to 8.8 from 8.62%. Many economists had expected inflation to hit a zenith a few months ago, but the cost of gas shot up again. The cost of gas shot up again. The average U.S. price for a gallon of regular gas rose about 11% in June and topped 5% for the first time. And topped $5 for the first time. The cost of other staples have also risen sharply. Higher prices for food, rent, new cars, and healthcare have also contributed to the uptick in inflation. If food and gas are removed from the equation, so-called core consumer prices likely rose a smaller 0.5% in June, economists predict. The Federal Reserve bases its decision on whether to raise interest rates on the increase in the overall cost of living, but it views the core figure as a better way to assess inflationary trends or what inflation will look like a year from now. In a welcome sign, the increase in the core CPI is expected to slip for the third month in a row to 5.7%. The core rate peaked at a 4-decade of 6.5% in March. So, yeah, I mean, again, I'm willing to bet that they're not going to completely talk about, the fact that wages haven't increased, so the cost of living keeps increasing, everything keeps getting more expensive, but then like the wages are the same. In fact, like we're starting to lose the purchasing power because this idea that like there're just certain jobs that are just supposed to be underpaid. Like, yeah, no, this is supposed to be underpaid, and if you're a burger flipper, that's your fault because it's just like, yeah, just get it. Like the fact that like when you tell people, hey, people can't live off of these wages and like they need to be paid more, the response is, well, they should just get a better job. And it's just like, that's the fundamental issue. Like they're okay with certain jobs being underpaid and being exploited because that's the whole business model. Because of course the shareholders have to get more. Again, it's like they're all about hard work, and then people actually end up in low wage physical labor jobs, and then their response to that is like, hey, like most places, like apartment places, they require like 3 months rent requirements, and it's like, if you work say $7.25, hold on, let me just do some quick math. So $7.25 times 40 a week, and then multiply it by 2 for 80 hours per pay shift. So it's $580, and I say about there's 3 pay days in a week. That's $17.40. So $17.40, and you say you live at a place. I have to live at a place that is typically around $780 a month, and they require 3 times the rent. So that times 3 is $23.40. So you're living off a minimum wage salary, doing 40 hours a week, and it's like you're not going to make the minimum requirement to live a proper life. And I mean, most places are more expensive than that. I live in a pretty cheap place, but imagine like you have to live at a place where the rent say like $900, and you still have to pay utilities separately and such, and it's like the minimum wage can't sustain that, and then they have to work 3 or 4, like the people have to burn themselves out, and they have to work and work and work, and then like you hear people who have been successful and they talk about their struggles. Well, you see, because I was stuck working 80 hours a week and this and that. So they have all these horror stories, but they try to use that as like, oh, you see, and this is why we shouldn't pay people, because if we pay people properly, then they're going to be slouching, and it's just like they talk about these economic horror stories, and the lesson that they draw from that is, and that is why everybody else should have to struggle and have to live day to day and fight for their lives. It's like, hey man, you didn't have to live like that, like at all. Like you shouldn't have. Like this is a fundamental ethical problem. Like just a difference in understanding. Because when I hear stories like that, I'm like, hey, you didn't have to live like that. Meanwhile, the people who live in certain situations like that, their lesson is, this is a character building experience, and this helped me for the best. It's literally like, because it's economic abuse. It's literally like when people talk about when they criticize soft parenting, because like, oh, sometimes hitting your kids, that's going to help them, and I was hit, and it's literally the same thing. Literally, this is a culture of hazing and abuse, and so I had a miserable, horrible experience, and that helped me, and so you're just a pussy, and you got to toughen up and grow some balls, and and again, it's all like these people cuck themselves for these bosses and managers who don't value them at all. And again, like people have this delusion that, hey, I'm going to experience this hardship, and then one day when I get into a position of power, I can do the same. And then it's just, that's what hazing is about. It's basically just, abusing that next generation of people coming up. So again, that was basically was talking about with domestic issues. And I'm still going to talk about the U.S. a bit, but this is more about the international section that I have with the show. And so, Joe Biden, he's doing his tour through the Middle East. And so he spoke with, he went to Saudi Arabia. He spoke with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. He also went to Israel. So he's doing a whole trip. And yeah, man, just very interesting to see Joe Biden just going around, doing the tour, hitting the pit stops, talking with Israel, talking with Saudi Arabia, and we're going to strengthen our ties. But again, this is a very interesting situation because they had they had the fist bump, and the crown prince, he fist bumped Joe Biden, and it's just like, what is happening here? Like, whenever you see stuff like this, it's just like, what is happening? So Joe Biden talked with the crown prince and talked also with the King Salman. So he was in Saudi Arabia. This was July 15th, Friday that they went to visit. So so continuing, just reading about some key points. So they were talking about oil. So they're trying to make a deal in terms of oil, since there's a bit of a crisis in terms of gas and oil. He also, apparently, Joe Biden said that he blamed the prince for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which again is like, okay, but that's it. It's just like, hey, stop the malarkey. That's all he does. Just like he does no finger wagging. Hey, stop the malarkey. By the way, let's do some deal with some oil. So it's like the Saudis know that the Americans can't retaliate in a serious manner because again, there were some rumors that the Saudis were floating the idea of accepting Chinese yuan. So it's a very precarious situation, and we're like the junkie. We're starting to be like, hey man, you're kind of doing some sketchy stuff, but I still need the shit. I need that. I need it. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm reading from New York Times. So President Biden said Friday night that he brought up the murder of Jamal Khashoggi during his closed-door meeting with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and told the prince that he considered him to blame. While Mr. Biden said nothing about Mr. Khashoggi during the public part of his meeting with the Crown Prince, he told reporters afterwards that he considered the killing outrageous and directly confronted Prince Mohammed, who was judged responsible by the CIA for the assassination carried out in Istanbul by a team of Saudi operatives in 2018. Again, it's just so crazy because Khashoggi just went into the embassy in Istanbul and he never came out. And it's just and then they try to say, oh no, he's not, no, nothing happened to him. It's just bro, they fucking killed him. They dismembered him. And it's oh, he comes in and then, oh no, he went out the back door. What the fuck? My goodness, that's so horrifying. So quote, I raised it, and this is from Biden, I raised it at the top of the meeting, making clear what I thought at the time and what I think of it now. I was straightforward and direct in discussing it. I made my view crystal clear. I said very straightforwardly, for an American president to be silent on an issue of human rights is inconsistent with who we are and who I am. I always stand up for our values. He reported that Prince Mohammed, often known by his initials MBS, denied culpability. Quote, he basically said that he was not personally responsible for it. Mr. Biden said, I indicated that I thought he was. So it's just it's just the finger wagging, but nothing is really going to come out of it. That's really it. So Mr. Khashoggi was a Saudi contributor to the Washington Post who was critical of the prince's rule. After his killing, Mr. Biden had said he would make Saudi Arabia a pariah, but aides say world events have left him little choice but to deal with the kingdom, meaning the Ukraine war and oil and gas problems. Because Western Europe now, there's talks about their energy rationing that's going to be coming, especially with the winter. Things are going to get tight for Europe. So continuing, Mr. Biden's decision to meet with the Crown Prince left human rights activists and Mr. Khashoggi's family outraged. Hasty Cengiz, his fiancée, tweeted where she said Mr. Khashoggi would have thought, quote, is this the accountability you promised for my murder? The blood of MBS's next victim is on your hands. Yeah, right. And also they're talking about cooperation with oil, deals and such. Again, recently, like in the last couple of years, because would say like fracking, the U.S. has been a little more energy independent, but now with this Ukraine war, there's a global issue in terms of oil supply. So they're trying to strike a deal because recently, like Saudi Arabia has been doing more business in terms of weapons than oil, but that might change. Particularly with the Yemen war, like all the weapons and bombs that are used in Yemen are U.S. made. So yeah, continuing, right. So this is concerning deals with oil supplies. The U.S. officials announced a wide range of accords with Saudi Arabia on topics like expanding oil supplies, building 5G telecommunication networks, opening Saudi airspace to Israeli commercial flights, and extending a truce in Yemen. The Biden administration has been eager to show that its relationship with Saudi Arabia has benefits far beyond oil, and that a team led by Brett McGurk, who has worked on Middle East policies under every president since George W. Bush, negotiated the array of deals announced on Friday. But it is high oil prices that are commanding worldwide attention, posing a political threat to President Biden and other leaders, and hindering efforts to choke off Russia's revenues in retaliations for its invasion of Ukraine. Quote, "I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen," Mr. Biden said after meeting with Saudi officials. He said he expected to see an impact from the last understandings in another couple of weeks. The administration did not say how much the Saudis would increase oil production. They have previously announced increased productions for July and August, and specifics about production in the fall are expected in August, as part of a larger accord with OPEC nations. The two nations announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops who were serving as peacekeepers on Tiran Islands in the Red Sea, a focus of many past conflicts, including the Six-Day War in 1967. The Americans will leave by the end of the year. The small island previously administered by Egypt commands the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba, a strategically important body of water because it is Israel's only route to the Red Sea. Perhaps the most innovative of the new agreements involves testing in Saudi Arabia a relatively new 5G technology designed to compete with Huawei, the Chinese company. And for years, the U.S. officials have been warning nations in Europe and the Middle East against depending on Chinese suppliers for wireless networks, and they believe the outbreak of the war in Ukraine has bolstered their argument about vulnerabilities created by dependence on a single foreign supplier. So this isn't just about oil. This is about also some tech stuff, against China, because China is, of course, doing business. And yeah, anyway, so they're just doing some business and on that front, but also interesting with this whole visit to the Middle East. He also went to Israel, so just talking with them. So right there, talking about oil supplies. But yeah, he also went to Israel and trying to talk concerning their developments and their problems with Palestine. So he literally Joe Biden, he met with Mahmoud Abbas, who is the president. And I say president loosely because the political situation with Palestine is very fractured. So they have a president, but then it's this is in the West Bank, and the West Bank is largely divided between the settlers. So it's occupied territory. So they have a president, but it's very clear that he has very limited powers because of Israel's occupation. And then there's the Gaza Strip, which is under Hamas, which of course is a terrorist group. But you really don't have much of an option other than to negotiate with them because they're the ones who are in control of Gaza. But of course, Israel's never gonna. We don't negotiate with terrorists, so they're never gonna. There's never gonna be diplomacy because Israel doesn't want diplomacy. They want to continue the occupation. So yeah. So just reading from USA Today about the visit with Palestinian leaders. They're talking about Biden working to restore ties with Palestinians. So earlier Friday in Israel, Biden said that, quote, "ground is not ripe at the moment for restarting the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians," as he still tried to offer empathy and some hope to the latter. The best way to do that, Biden said after announcing new humanitarian assistance, is to improve Palestinians' day-to-day lives. Quote, "The Palestinian people are hurting now, You can just feel it, your grief and frustration, Biden said in a joint appearance in Bethlehem with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Nonetheless, Abbas said he stressed to Biden the importance of the two-state solution as a foundation for resolving the decades-long conflict. Abbas said he's looking forward to the U.S. reopening a consulate in East Jerusalem, something Biden has said he will do, but that's opposed by the Israeli government. And so they're just talking about some key points on the Palestinian meeting. So what they're saying is, right, ties were frayed under Trump. Biden has focused on restoring ties with the Palestinians that had been ruptured during the Trump administration. Creation of an independent Palestinian nation alongside Israel has been the North Star of a negotiated settlement. In recent years, various developments have diminished that prospect, including the internal political divisions within both camps. Other setbacks, so some of the leverage Palestinians had was lost when Israel normalized relations with several Arab nations, a process started during the Trump administration and that the Biden administration is working to expand. Biden's approach: while the Trump administration considered the so-called Abraham Accords a substitute for progress on an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, the Biden administration hopes to leverage normalization as a bridge towards progress on the issue. And also small steps as a sign of progress. The Biden administration pointed to recent phone calls between Abbas and Israel Prime Minister Yair Lapid, the first contact at that level in several years. So, they're trying to make some diplomatic situations and diplomatic talks. So, yeah, it's a developing situation, but they want to push the two-state solution, and that's just problematic because it's just like, the West Bank is occupied territory. These settlers are encroaching on that. So, again, what's going to happen with these settlers, illegal settlements, okay? And I mean, the IDF, protects those settlements, and, these are, really, ultra right-wing, Orthodox Jews who are doing this sort of thing. These are, the fringe types who are, they're Israeli nationalists, Jewish nationalists, Zionists. So, that's a question because, of course, the Israeli government, that, it's just what's going to happen? We're going to have a two-state solution, but then what's going to happen with these settlers who are illegally occupying these territories? I don't think the Israeli government's going to forcibly remove them. They won't, because that's going to cause a lot of issues within Israel. This nationalism is a very real thing. Yeah, it's an apartheid state, right? So again, and then you talk about the one-state solution, which people are so opposed because it's they're basically saying, yeah, Israel should be a Jewish state. They're just openly for some reason ethno-nationalism is okay when the Jews do it, but of course when every other group does it, that's wrong. But no, the Jews should have their ethno-nationalist state. And again, it's pointed out also it's very much a racial thing because you have black Jewish people, Ethiopians, who also regularly experience discrimination. There are Arab Christians Shireen, the journalist who got murdered. Shireen, she was a Christian, but because she's Arab, she's the other. So it's a lot deeper than just religious conflicts. This is very much a racial, ethnic issue because of Israel. Again, all the everything's on Israel because they could take a step back and let the country become integrated and let they can do it, but they don't want to because they need that Jewish supremacy. That's why they have all these birthright, visa, they want Jews around the world to keep coming, preferably white Jewish people coming into Israel to settle and prop up the population. That's their whole policy. They even have measures to explicitly if you're an American Jewish person, you can pretty much just go and just start a whole new life in Israel. But if you're a Palestinian American, they explicitly deny you access. Again, I'm a brown-skinned person, and if I went to Israel, I'm going to be treated like a Palestinian, even though I'm not even anywhere related to that region. But because I'm a non-white person, they would, unless I'm explicitly American, woo, yeah. Again, it's very racial, very very discriminatory. But also so just continuing with the aid that's being proposed to Palestinians. So it's 316 million in aid, and so here's how they're dividing it up. So 100 million will go to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network to improve Palestinians' access to healthcare services such as oncology, dialysis, neonatal intensive care, and specialized maternity care. And another $200 million will go to the United Nations Relief Program to deliver critical services to Palestinian refugees in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. And additional initiatives include food security assistance, extending 4G digital access into the West Bank and Gaza, and restarting economic discussions between Palestinians and Israelis. So, yeah, it's something, it's because normally the policy of the U.S. was just complete, like, oh, what? Palestinians? What? Like, because again, they got to support Israel no matter what, but of course, like, this attention now about the Israeli apartheid is so obvious and clear cut. Like, the U.S. has to, like, kind of like, again, Joe Biden just wagging the finger, hey, stop the malarkey, hey. Yeah, so, and again, like, it's, the U.S. can be so schizophrenic because, like, they're talking about the damage done by the Trump administration, and now, like, it's like every 4 years there's like a new like boss, and it's just like, okay, what there's like a completely schizophrenic foreign policy every 4 years. And so, yeah, I can't imagine being these like, Palestinians just sitting here like, okay, well, we can work with you, but then when this next election comes up, who knows what's gonna be in your place. So talking about just East Jerusalem and different measures there. So, yeah, why it matters. So, right. So they're talking about East Jerusalem being predominantly Arab and claimed by Palestinian leaders as the future capital of their independent state. Since then, former President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in 2017. Israeli government officials participated in visits to East Jerusalem by U.S. officials, but they didn't accompany Biden Friday. Biden hasn't announced any progress toward his commitment to reopening a consulate in Jerusalem, which has served as a de facto embassy. So, right, so, there's talks, but, like, I don't really think that it's going to amount to anything. But, yeah, this whole visit in the Middle East that Biden is doing is certainly going to be interesting to just watch, because, like, there's the whole, like, press events and the whole public, spectacle of it, but then it's, like, the nitty gritty of it, like what are the actual like policy decisions that are being proposed. So yeah, so that's the Middle East, and that's just Brandon visiting the Middle East and doing his talks and his rounds. But again, we have other matters to discuss. Most of all, with this assassination in Japan, like, so much is happening around the world, and then this pops off. There's an assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which was a pretty big deal. Like, of all the places in the world to expect something like this, nobody was really saying like Japan. But yeah, this is where we're at now. So, right, so we're reading from NBC News, and they were talking about like the possible motivations, because as this sort of thing happened, it's like, what are his motivations? It's just ideological extremism, like what is this? And so what it appears to be is more so this man, the shooter, had his mom basically became brainwashed by this cult that Shinzo Abe is affiliated with, and yeah, the guy, like, he made a whole blunderbuss. Like, he strapped on 2 pipes. He had this guy was former he was in the Navy, or really they call it the Maritime Self-Defense Force, but he was a military veteran, and he built a whole blunderbuss and just he just blew him up. He just got him, just capped his ass. And yeah, man, of course, people online were like, of course, making fun of this and whatever. It's Twitter, so people are going to say what they want to say. It's certainly, I'm more like thinking about just the regular people in Japan, because like this sort of thing is abnormal in Japan. Not to say that they don't have like political violence. They do. Like, the Yakuza have done quite a bit. But this is like so open and like literally just like public television. Like, it would be like somebody just like killed Donald Trump. Like, they just shot him. Like, whoa. Like, that would cause huge issue. Like, huge, as much as I don't like the guy, like, that would be a pretty bad situation to have to deal with. And I'm just interested to see where things are going to go, because is this going to drive Japanese politics towards a radicalized direction? Because again, they're not completely like upfront with their right-wing attitudes, but it's there. It's a very conservative country. You hear stories about their police, and like they don't mess around, even though they don't necessarily have violent crime the way that we do. And of course, like, you have a lot of people who point to Japan as being like the perfect nation, completely disregarding like the history and geographic conditions, economic conditions. So, it's like, people are talking about like the lack of gun violence, that like this is like their second gun homicide, but it's like it's an island, okay, and also like it's so much easier to control what kind of weapons you get into your country, what kind of stuff gets into your country if it's an island. And also, it's like, we talk about how peaceful Japan is today. Meanwhile, like 400 years ago, they were like in like feudal civil war with like warlords and the Sengoku Jidai. Like, and then like when guns were introduced, they were pretty trigger happy. I mean, we think that it was all like swords and samurais. Like, well, I mean, it was that, but once the guns were introduced, that they were like, my favorite meme is just like, guns get introduced. Anyways, I started blasting because that's literally what happened. They just started, using that. But again, I like playing Shogun. That's like, again, I'm getting lost in the. It's just Japanese history is very interesting to study, but it can be very generalized, especially by these weeaboos. Like, you literally have like unironic like Japanese nationalist imperialists who aren't even Japanese. So it's like, what the fuck? Like, it's weird. But I mean, it's like that far right fascist, extremist radicalization. But just want to talk about this church that Shinzo Abe was affiliated with. So I'm reading from NBC, a messianic religious movement was conducting mass weddings and courting prominent U.S. conservatives, has found itself at the center of the speculation surrounding the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, also known as Unification Church, condemned Abe's killing at a news conference Monday and sought to distance itself from media reports that the suspect's mother made a hefty donation to the group before she went bankrupt. Japanese media, citing police sources, reported that a suspect, identified as Tetsuya Yamagami, 41, confessed to the attacks and told investigators that he held a grudge against a group that he said was connected with Abe, but the violence itself was not politically motivated. Abe, who had been Japan's longest-serving prime minister until he resigned in 2020, was gunned down Friday at an outdoor campaign rally with what authorities believe was a homemade firearm. And so they're saying that this was 2 days before a parliamentary election. So, I mean, like, the gunman... It's very interesting. I also was reading how the whole press conference that Shinzo Abe made, the public press conference, it was like a last minute thing. So there's like speculation as to how like the gunman knew who was going to be there and how he was able to get it together quickly, how long he had been, developing this weapon. Again, too, this wasn't the only one that he had. He had like a whole other gun that had nine barrels. So it was like a volley gun. It's like, this guy knew how to make some stuff, man. Like, it's like, again, we have a talk about gun regulations, but still, it's just like, listen, man, if somebody wants to kill somebody, they will go to extreme methods. And as we saw here, like, when you look at the images or the footage of the actual shooting, like, you can tell, like, just from like the sound of the shot and also like the smoke, that like, yeah, this is a homemade contraption. But they call it like a zip gun. So it was like he made a zip gun, and that's what they did. So, yeah, again, this is not politically motivated. Rather, it's just like, it's like a vendetta, basically. Anyway, yeah. Of course, though, people were trying to say that it was like a Korean, like they have ethnic Koreans that live in Japan, so they were trying to scapegoat them, or that he was like some radical leftist. And they even were posting, like, there were far-right politicians in Europe posting images of Hideo Kojima as the suspect, as the, you know, the killer. And like, dude, like, imagine Hideo Kojima, because like, he's a nerd, you know, he's just goofing off, and then like he just sees online, like, what the fuck, like, oh man. Right. So continuing, right. The implied association with the Unification Church, whose history with Abe goes back more than half a century, to his grandfather who was, a notorious figure in Manchukuo during the imperialist occupation. So this is, Japanese politics, and, it's, it gets deep, man. It gets really deep. So his grandfather is stirring up larger questions and concerns about the group's practices and political ties. Tomihiro Tanaka, the president of the church's branch in Japan, said that Yamagami's mother is a church member who would attend functions about once a month, but that the church had no record of asking for her to make a large donation. Tanaka declined to comment further because of the police investigation. Quote, "We will fully cooperate with the police investigation if they request us to do so," Tanaka told reporters. He also added that neither Yamagami nor Abe had been church members. Police have yet to have publicly identified the group of which Yamagami's mother belonged, and it is unclear whether she was also involved in other religious organizations. Still, scholars of Japanese politics and religion say the Unification Church and groups like it may face a reckoning in the country among officials who want to examine their financial structures and how they function. Quote, "There's going to be a lot of conversations about deeper oversight into the kind of things that will lead to political violence, like the building of homemade guns, but also allegations of predatory practices," said Sheila Smith, a Japanese foreign policy and politics expert at the Council on Foreign Relations, a nonpartisan think tank. Levi McLaughlin, an associate professor of Asian religions at North Carolina State University, said that a stigma remains attached to organized religion in Japan, and that some Japanese may already be leery about the Unification Church because it was founded in South Korea by a self-professed messiah, Sung Myung Moon, who died in 2012 at age 92. Quote, "Such a group might be seen as a nefarious influence characterized as preying upon the weaknesses of those who are already struggling," McLaughlin said. Quote, "But the truth is that its adherents are also intelligent and have a sophisticated series of reasons for why they join this and feel like they must forge this type of community." And then they have like a photo of the founders, Sung Myung Moon, and it's like they're all in this religious garbs and they have these crowns, and it's kind of funny the crowns that they have. It looks like y'all remember like elementary school, like those little crowns that you would forge, like just cut out from paper and like put some tape and then just put on your head. Oh, like it literally looks like that. Like this is so, again, that this is what they do. They get people who are estranged and who are alienated, because I mean there is a large portion of Japan who are living in pretty dilapidated circumstances. Of course, they talk about the economic growth that Japan had made in like the 70s and 80s, but also there's a bit of an economic stagnation, population decline. Like there's a whole generation of young guys who just like the hikikomori, I think I'm saying that right, those guys who just stay online and never have sex. That's Shinzo Abe's policy. Just have sex. Hey, don't pull out, bro. Just, hey, we need more Japanese kids. Hey, why don't you like increase immigration? So say like Filipinos and Koreans can come in and, no, have sex. There we go. Yeah, same, again, we're going to see this, it's no coincidence that Elon Musk made that tweet about underpopulation, right? Because these elites, they know that there's going to be a bit of a decline and stagnation in the world population. And it's interesting that you see this sort of thing from politicians, from billionaires, because, hey, if there's a big population, then, hey, that's a larger workforce, which means they can be exploited more. Wages can be, again, it's like a supply and demand thing. So if there's more workers, right, then you can basically have that leverage of, hey, I can charge you whatever wage I want, because if you don't want that wage, well, then somebody else is going to take the job. So, when they talk about underpopulation, it's for them, it's the concern of they won't have that leverage anymore, right? Like, one of the things that led to the ending of serfdom in Europe was because of the Black Death, because it basically just like killed off almost like half the population. And so the monarchs and the elites, they couldn't, they didn't have that leverage as before, because basically now they had to, it's like, the monarchs and the lords and such like that, they have that power, but at the same time, they're still reliant on the serfs and the farmers. And so if the serfs and the farmers are dying off, and then like you have half of the population as before, those farmers and serfs now have leverage, because it's like, hey, you need us. So now we can negotiate, because like you kind of need us. And if you're going to make things hard, then we can, it's just like, again, we're seeing that now. Again, also within our own workforce, like we had like 1 million people die from COVID, and you have people like literally complaining online. What happened? What happened? Nobody wants to work in these restaurants. Hey, they fucking died, bro. And that's just like 1.2 million died in the US. And then like that is very obviously underreported. And that doesn't also take into account other people who die from like stress-related illnesses, heart issues, again, like these low-wage working conditions, like it's terrible for your health. And like a lot of people die because our healthcare system is for profit. And like a lot of the times, like these health issues are preventative with like, early screenings, but because healthcare is so expensive, nobody takes preventative measures and nobody does physicals, because it's like the money. And if there's somebody who's sick, it's like, well, I have to keep working. Like literally, like unironically, people are telling stories now of, they tell all these stories about people saying, oh yeah, I have COVID, and they're still like going about their business, going to retail places, going to work. They're literally like sick, and their bosses are saying, okay, well, you can just wear a mask and still come to work. It's like, dude, wow, man. So yeah, that's with Japan, and I kind of went on a rant about like population and the workforce and such, but again, like the similar situation that's happening with Japan in terms of declining population, we're seeing it within the US. We're seeing it a lot in these industrialized nations. And so it's going to turn into this like weird, like, because they don't want the migrants to come in, because it's that great replacement theory, right? It's not just a white supremacist thing. This is happening in other places in the world. But the solution is immigration, because otherwise it's like this weird like breeding like policy of like, well, have sex. And they're talking about like possible proposals to tax the childless. It's like anything other than allowing migrants to come in, because we don't want those brown and black people replacing us. Like that's literally all it is. Like that's, yeah. So anyway, so that's with Japan and the assassination there, which is something that we're going to have to follow up on later. And Japan has been dealing with that. But hey, we're also trying to highlight issues with, or just different developments politically in Europe, because right now there is a spring that's happening, a spring of farmers in say the Netherlands, and also in Italy and Germany. So there's some undercurrents happening. Like the prime minister in Italy has retired, as well as Boris Johnson is retiring. So, or he has retired, he has resigned. Yeah, so we're just gonna have to talk about this, and it's multifaceted, because Europe is going to, I don't know, I feel like this is very much aligned with right-wing extremism. Again, Europe is turning more and more nationalistic. They are. It's the EU is very likely, on thin ice, because they talk about globalism and the neoliberal establishment. And there's this idea that like this uprising against the neoliberal establishment, the globalists, it's left wing. It's not. It's largely right wing. It really is. So, talking about, real quick about Italy and the Prime Minister Mario Draghi resigning, So there's a populist coalition that is rising up, demanding his resignation, which has happened. And so, yeah. So just reading from the BBC, the former head of the European Central Bank has led a unity government since February 2021. In this statement, he said the pact of trust that has sustained the unity government had gone. However, the president refused to accept his resignation. So the president of Italy, President Sergio Mattarella, appointed Mr. Draghi to lead Italy's post-COVID pandemic recovery and save the country from endemic instability. He has now called on Mr. Draghi to address the parliament to provide a clear picture of the political situation. The effect of President Mattarella's intervention is not entirely clear. Mr. Draghi is expected to go to Parliament next Wednesday and with sufficient backing could remain in office. So the extraordinary developments in Rome capped a day of drama triggered when five-star leader Giuseppe Conte refused to back the government's £23 billion or €23 billion package of economic aid for families and businesses, arguing Mr. Draghi was not doing enough to tackle the cost of living crisis. So yeah, I mean, like Italy, they, during their lockdown, there was some pretty intense images coming out of like Italy, particularly southern Italy. Like I don't know too much about it, but I do understand that like there's like a divide between northern and southern Italy, and it's very interesting when you like look at nations and you understand like their internal dilemmas and issues, and it's very much along agrarian and urban industrial lines. So again, this is more talking about just the economic pandemic recovery, because again, this whole neoliberal economic system is leaving people out to dry, and of course that populism is going to be taken advantage of from the right. So yeah, so even though the government comfortably won Thursday's vote in the Senate with the help of other parties, the man dubbed Super Mario, it's a me, had warned repeatedly that without five-star support, the government could not continue. So Mr. Draghi paid a first hour-long visit to President Mattarella, and after reflecting on his future, issued his statement of resignation. Quote, "Today's votes in Parliament are very significant from a political point of view. The national unity majority that supported this government since its creation no longer exists," he said. After addressing ministers, he returned to the Quirinal Palace to tender his resignation to the president. Avoiding the cameras, he did not use the main door. Elections were already due early in 2023, and if the government does collapse, a vote is likely to take place this autumn. Several parties on the right are keen on early elections, but a period of political uncertainty will jeopardize Italy's efforts to tackle a looming energy crisis and pass next year's budget to secure EU funding. Right up to the Senate vote, attempts were made to resolve the coalition crisis. Milan's stock market tumbled 3.4% as nervousness spread to investors in the Eurozone's third biggest economy. European Union Economy Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, who is himself a former Italian Prime Minister, said earlier the EU's executive was watching developments in Rome with worried astonishment. The head of Italy's industry group, Confindustria, said Five Star's decision had shown, quote, total irresponsibility. Five Star was originally the biggest party in Mr. Draghi's broad-based coalition, but the movement has seen a string of defections and falling apart. The other main parties are the far-right League, center-right Forza Italia, center-left Democratic Party, and Liberal Italia Viva. Former party leader Luigi Di Maio accused Five Star of a cynical plan to bring down the Draghi government to revive its own support while dragging Italy to economic and social collapse. Parties across the political spectrum have had next year's general election in their sights, especially on the right. League leader Matteo Salvini, Giorgia Meloni of Brothers of Italy are competing for leadership of a potential right-wing coalition. Ms. Meloni called for elections immediately, announcing, quote, "I'm ready to govern." Mr. Salvini said a period of political paralysis was unthinkable. Politicians on the left are less prepared for elections, and Democratic Party Secretary Enrico Letta said the focus now had to be on reconstructing a coalition in Parliament so that the Draghi government could restart. So very, very clear political divide and very obvious opportunistic populism from the right. Again, this is what happens. Working people are left to dry, and then they get swept up in this nationalist fervor, and then they fall in with the far right. I mean, like literally, like Mussolini's granddaughter is a politician, and she has a huge sway. Like there's like a neo-fascist movement growing within Italy. Like they're unironically for Mussolini. So yeah, man, like this is what's happening, like, and of course the left wing is unprepared for this. And so this is just something to keep an eye on. But again, we're going to see this fracturing happening within countries. Say like France, they just had their election with Emmanuel Macron, the president. But there was also talks of a left-wing coalition, which Macron didn't necessarily work with. He, of course, went to the right. This is what happens every time. They always concede to the right. Again, it's always so interesting. The compromise and the moderate opinion is always to the right. Oh, no. This is too extreme. So I'm going to go to the right. It's just like so enlightened and so centrist. But yeah, no, we have to go further right because, wanting free healthcare and education, that's radical extremism. And we can't allow that. So let's compromise with the right-wing position and further privatize all these services. And yeah, man, so that's what's happening here. But that's with Italy. And so, their government is going to go the way that it is. I'm not holding my breath that the election is going to go to the right. It very obviously is. This is going to continue further around Europe. Yeah, man. So anyway, and also talking about with the UK and Boris Johnson having this basically insurrection of his ministers resigning, like up to like 40 people resigned. So like, yeah, man. I mean, the Conservative government in the UK is on weak legs. So yeah, so just reading also from the BBC about just they're calling it the downfall. So just different courses of events, and this had to do a lot with basically Boris Johnson having this one of these MPs who was accused of sexual harassment, and they didn't really do much to reprimand him. So this is very much like. Yeah, this is very much like that all these ministers were saying, we're not going to allow this. And, they had a vote of no confidence, and, Boris Johnson got through that. Again, it's just, there's only so much that I can pay attention with it. But of course, like, it's a pretty big development that this happened in the UK, and they're having their instability issues. And it also talks about, say, like independence with Scotland. Yeah, I mean, even like Northumbria, like Northern England, they want to also secede. So like the UK is on very thin legs right now, very weak legs. Right. So, right. Just want to talk real quick about from the BBC quote. The immediate crisis for the government to deal with was over the behavior of Conservative MP Chris Pincher, who was alleged that he had groped two men at a private members club. The big problem for ministers was that there had been other claims about Mr. Pincher. It took the intervention of Lord MacDonald, a former permanent secretary at the Foreign Office, to force the government to tell the truth. Mr. Johnson had been told of a similar complaint in 2019 before he had given Mr. Pincher a job in his team. But that wasn't the story given by number 10 to ministers to tell the rest of us. Quote, "We get to this week and the Pincher episode is growing and growing," says former Brexit Secretary David Davis, who called for Mr. Johnson to quit as early as January this year. Quote, "It went from the sort of third item on the news agenda to the top of the agenda, partly because of the way we handled it. Downing Street's version of events had unraveled and Mr. Johnson had to admit it was wrong. This followed months of criticism of the Prime Minister's handling of parties that took place in Downing Street during COVID lockdowns. He had himself been fined by the police." Like Mr. Johnson, right? Right. Mr. Javid says he could sense a growing discontent among colleagues who were being sent out to defend the government on TV and radio, but they had decided to give number 10 the benefit of the doubt after being assured there was not a problem. Quote, "not a problem." It was sent out to the media around every so often, said former Justice Minister Victoria Atkins. You go on to talk about something that was really important. Quote, you were really excited about that, would hope it was going to make a real difference, but it got sidetracked into discussions about other things. But once number 10's untruth about Mr. Pincher emerged, it was time for some cabinet members to strike, or cabinet ministers to strike. Mr. Javid resigned first, questioning the Prime Minister's integrity, followed minutes later by Mr. Sunak, who said Mr. Johnson was not competent or serious. Quote, I got my resignation letter ready, says Mr. Javid. I signed it. I wasn't going to tell anyone other than the Prime Minister first. He says that he went to see Mr. Johnson and explained to him that he would be resigning now. Obviously, he didn't want me to, but he understood. Were Mr. Sunak and Mr. Jani's actions coordinated? Quote, I had no idea that he was planning to resign, said Mr. Javid. We hadn't had not a single discussion about it whatsoever. One of Mr. Johnson's staunchest allies, Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries, was furious. Quote, I was quite stunned that there were people who thought that removing the Prime Minister, who's won the biggest majority that we'd seen since Margaret Thatcher in less than 3 years, was acceptable, she said. Quote, the anti-democratic nature of what they were doing was enough to alarm me. For me, it was a coup. Right, and so this was just an update that they were following Tuesday, July 5th. And so, reading further. So, I mean, like, yeah, it was like, yeah, the poor handling of the Pincher episode that they're saying, and also some other stuff, and it's just funny too that they were like one of his defenders was talking. Oh, he has won a majority since Margaret Thatcher, which I don't know if you want to consider that something to be proud of. Nobody, the way that they celebrated Thatcher's death, like, I don't know if you want to be in her playing field, but hey, for conservatives, they love Thatcher, they love Reagan, right? Like I was watching Michael Parenti's videos and speeches in the 80s talking about Thatcher, and he said like, yeah, she's Ronald Reagan in drag, which is pretty funny. But yeah, so what they were saying is that like 38 members of the government had walked out, and Mr. Johnson was still not going to resign. He was still going to hold, but yeah, he resigned. So yeah, it had taken nearly 60 members of the government, 60 members of the government resigning to make him quit. And this is just this is just something that they're going to have to deal with. And some of these are parliamentary videos, the House of Commons, right? Because the House of Lords, they don't film that, but the House of Commons, they were just following that. And sometimes saying the parliamentary videos, it's pretty funny because like they can just like like it's so like, yes, this is Western civilization, so cultured, right? Oh yes, I do say so, get the sergeant at arms, I do say Western civilization, that's the heart of the Anglosphere, right? The British Empire. I do say so. Yeah. So anyway, that's England. That's the UK. Something to pay attention with. This is going to continue further with their government issues. But yeah. So right, we're also going to be talking about the Netherlands and their problems that they've been having with Dutch farmers. So it's interesting because there's the aesthetic of the farmers and of the working class rising up against this, which they're putting the pollution emission regulations, and of course like the pollution emissions, it's largely on the fossil fuels, so of course they're making life harder for say the farmers. So that is certainly a case to be made. At the same time though, a lot of these farmers are right-wing and conservative, and they're kulaks. I mean, if we're going to talk about as leftists, we have to look at them and understand these are kulaks. That's what they are. I mean, actually, their class position is much higher than that. But again, there's very much real talks about exploitation of migrant labor, particularly from Eastern Europe, Polish, Belarusian migrants, right? Yeah, so it's the same dynamic that happens here. So anyway, it's like I don't want to say like I don't want to like completely like commit to supporting this, because I also have to recognize that these are not leftists. They're not at all. This is very much like in league with like truckers' convoys. And believe me, we're going to see stuff like this also with farmers in the U.S. Like, it's going to happen. It's only a matter of time. It's just very interesting to see that there's just a whole group of people that basically, if they don't get their way, they're just going to sabotage the food supply. I look into like the collectivization within the Soviet Union, and so they talk about the brutal response of the Soviet Union, but really, if you look at it further, like the kulaks, they were burning their crops and they were killing off livestock. Like some estimates go as high as 30% of the livestock was killed off, and they basically destroyed like millions of acres of croplands, farmlands, sabotaging equipment in resistance to the collectivization, because the kulaks wanted to maintain their monopoly of land ownership, their monopoly on the food supply, which is antithetical to communism. So it's like, they talk about the Soviet Union being brutal to the kulaks. Like, there's a term, they call it classicide, which is really interesting. The only times I find the terms of classicide is in reference to dekulakization. So dekulakization is seen as like politicide, classicide, but then having working people living day to day, working in below minimum wage standards, basically being killed off through infectious diseases with COVID, and like, having a healthcare system that is for profit, that, leaves people bankrupt and homeless, right? That's not classicide, right? But dekulakization, collectivization, that's classicide. And also another thing too, if you're burning the food supply, burning the grain, killing off livestock, like that's an act of war. Like literally, like, killing off the food supply, destroying the food supply, that's a war crime. So, like, it's the kulaks who started the violence, right? I mean, if somebody broke into your home and didn't they didn't touch you or your family, didn't touch your TV or anything, they just went into your fridge and started just throwing out your food, you would perceive that as an act of violence, right? You would probably respond in kind with violence, because, like, what the fuck? Like, that's my food, right? If we move to nationalize these grocery chains, like, they would destroy their food products. They would. That's what they're going to do. But of course, the problem is the collectivization, not these, owners, these monopolies of food destroying the food, right? That's not perceived as violence. Because again, like, you think you're going to ask nicely, hey, can you stop destroying our food supply? No. Like, it's like violence is going to be met with violence. But of course, yeah, anyway, I'm getting caught up. But anyway, this is just what we're seeing here. And again, I'm not saying that like these farmers are entirely in the wrong, because I mean, again, these emission regulations, although it's the right idea, it's too heavily on the agricultural sector, and it should be more on top of the fossil fuel industries. And again, this is a dynamic that we're going to see further with the urban industrial centers and agrarian farmlands. Like, again, like, there's a lot of work that I want to do in terms of projects, but like this dynamic of urban centers and farmlands, like, this goes back to the beginning of civilization. Again, the Industrial Revolution, or the Agricultural Revolution, that led to urbanization, and those dynamics there continue today. And then it only ratcheted further because of industrialization and the increased centralization of urban centers and their control that they try to impose on the agricultural sectors. And so, like, you hear, like, farmers, they're resentful towards the city folk, because it's like, yeah, it's a balance. And so this is what we're going to see now as, this continues further. Like, there's going to be competition between agricultural and industrial urban centers. So, reading from AP News. So, Bales of hay lie burning along Dutch highways. Supermarket shelves stand empty because distribution centers are blocked by farmers. Then at dusk, a police officer pulls a pistol and shoots at a tractor. Dutch farmers are embroiled in a summer of discontent that shows no sign of abating. Their target: government plans to rein in emissions of nitrogen oxide and ammonia that they say threaten to wreck agricultural way of life and put them out of business. So the reduction targets could radically alter Netherlands' lucrative agricultural sector, which is known for its intensive farming, and may also foreshadow similar reforms and protests in other European nations whose farmers also pump out pollutants. I mean, the agricultural sector certainly is a big contributor in emissions, but again, it's like they're not really, going to target the fossil fuel industries, right? So anyway. So, this is certainly something that needs to be done because we do have to address those emissions, but it's singled, like this specific sector and industry is being singled out when the larger contributor is the fossil fuel and oil industries. So that turmoil seems a long way off Friday at Jaap Zegwaard's dairy farm, which occupies 80 hectares or 200 acres of grassland close to the port city of Rotterdam, whose chimneys and cranes form a backdrop to his fields. Most of Zegwaard's herd of 180 cattle, mostly black and white Holstein Friesians, graze in meadows close to a traditional Dutch windmill and large white wind turbines. And even if the farm has been in Zegwaard's family for 5 generations, some 200 years, he doesn't know if he would recommend farming life to his 7-year-old daughter and 3-year-old twin boys. Quote, "If you ask me now, I say please don't even think about it," the 41-year-old said. "There are so many worries. Life's much too beautiful to deal with what's going on in the agricultural sector at the moment." Quote, "Ask the average farmer. It's profoundly sad," he said. "At the heart of the clash between farmers and the Dutch government are moves to protect human health and vulnerable natural habitats from pollution in the form of nitrogen oxides and ammonia, which are produced by industry, transport, and in the waste of livestock." So the Netherlands, a nation of 17.5 million people inhabiting an area a little larger than Maryland, has 1.57 million registered dairy cattle and just over 1 million calves being raised for meat. Statistics shows the country's farms produced exports 94.5 billion euros in 2019. Nitrogen oxides and ammonia raise nutrient levels and acidity in the soil, leading to a reduction in biodiversity. Airborne nitrogen leads to smog and tiny particles that are damaging to people's health. When the Council of State, the country's top administrative court, legislative advisory body, ruled in 2019 that Dutch policies to rein in nitrogen emissions were inadequate, it forced the government to consider tougher measures. Unveiling a map detailing nitrogen reduction targets last month, the Dutch government called it an unavoidable transition. It said the coming year would finally bring clarity for Dutch farmers, quote, whether and how they can continue with their business. The minister sees 3 options for farmers: become more sustainable, relocate, or stop. The Dutch government aims to slash nitrogen emissions by 50% by 2030 and has earmarked an extra 24.3 billion euros to fund the changes. Provincial authorities have 1 year to draw up plans for achieving the reduction. Nitrogen expert Wim de Vries, a professor at Wageningen University and research, doubts that deadline is realistic. Quote, "It seems to be very fast and there is a legacy already for 40 years because the problem was much bigger in the mid-1980s. We then called it acid rain," he said. Quote, "Considering that legacy, it doesn't make so much difference if we do it 7 or 10 years or 12 years. We anyhow have to wait for decades for nature to improve seriously." Farmers have been protesting for years against the government's nitrogen policies, but the emission targets unleashed new demonstrations with tractors clogging highways and supermarket distribution centers that led to briefly to some shortages of fresh produce. Farmers also clashed with police outside the home of the minister in charge of the government's nitrogen policy. And this week, an officer opened fire on a tractor driven by a 16-year-old. After initially being held on suspicions for attempted manslaughter, the young driver was released without charge. The government has appointed a veteran political negotiator to act as a middleman, but the gesture was immediately rejected by activist farmers in the nation's largest farming lobby group. Quote, the government does not offer any space to enter into real conversation, said the farming lobby group LTO. Under these conditions, speaking with the mediator is pointless. The LTO, which represents about 30,000 farms, nearly half of the Dutch total, described the nitrogen reduction targets as simply unfeasible. Dutch farms produced exports worth 94.5 billion euros in 2019. The group says the government is focused on reducing livestock and buying up farms and not paying enough attention to innovation and sustainable farming practices. Environmentalists say now is the time to act. Quote, you rip a plaster off a wound in one go, said Andy Palman, director of Greenpeace Netherlands. Painful choices are now necessary. Zegwaards Farms is an area where the government is seeking only a 12% cut in emissions, yet he also demonstrates out of solidarity with others and supports the protest. Quote, the average person currently sees the Netherlands as a nitrogen polluter. While we are also a food producer, it seems like people have forgotten that, he told the Associated Press. So there are deeper issues to talk about in terms of nitrogen and pollutant problems in terms of farming. Again, because it's heavily industrialized, and not just that, because we have a lot of livestock and they fart and they poop, and that also releases other emissions such as methane as well. Nitrogen isn't the only one. So we're just following that, because at the same time, it's like the nitrogen emission issue is a very serious one, like something that has to be looked at. And so these farmers see their way of life, they see these regulations, and so it's like they have that blue collar attitude of like, oh, the government's in my business and I'm trying to work, and their whole way of life is basically what they perceive it as being under threat. But at the same time, these are not like they have the aesthetic as being the blue collar worker, but again, these are millionaires, okay? Like, they don't have all these tractors and all these other equipment. Like, again, as they were saying, like 200 acres, like that's a big plot of land, like these are rich people. So like, again, I bet you if you ask their political affiliations and their sympathies, it's probably going to be pretty conservative and pretty right wing. As I've been saying, right wing nationalism is certainly on the rise, and this neoliberal system is leaving people out to dry, and they get radicalized. And of course, they see like government encroachment as a problem, even though like this is to curb emissions and environmental policies. Because as they're saying, I mean, it's not just the Netherlands. This is going to be an issue down the line. Nitrogen content in the soil, topsoil, is going to be a serious problem. It's already like depleted. Like, yeah, man, this fertilizer, it's changing the chemistry of the soil, and we're going to start seeing not only with climate conditions affecting crops, but also the nutrition within the soil, because we just completely created this artificial system that is changing the chemistry. So that's something that has to be looked into as well. But of course, these farmers are going to get hit hard. So again, that's just something to keep an eye on. But yeah, I mean, we're going to start seeing the same thing within the U.S. pretty soon, I bet, because we're going to have to start doing our own regulations of the farming, agricultural sector. Again, though, like they're going to single out the agricultural sector, but then do nothing with the actual fossil fuel industries, who are primarily responsible for these climate emissions. So yeah, it's Anyway, so we're talking about different protest movements and possible uprisings within Europe. We're also talking about different uprisings within the global south, such as Sri Lanka, which has had some major developments, as we saw with some images and footage of protesters storming the presidential palace. So, within Sri Lanka, they've had financial crises, and also just different protest movements from working class peoples, fuel crises, consumer good crises. So they basically reached a breaking point. So now that their government has basically collapsed, or they're bankrupt, and even the the president resigned and he's in the Maldives. He fled to the Maldives, so they had a new president, and currently they're having the interim government, and that's mainly in Colombo. Like, they're mainly just focusing on Colombo. I'm interested to see about the rest of the island and what conditions are like there, because I mean, if people are struggling in the city, it's probably a lot worse in the countryside. So it's very interesting to see like what's going to happen there. And again, they had that civil war with the Tamil Tigers. Who knows if that could prop up some other insurgencies, because I mean, it's basically like the government collapsed, so like they have to, we'll have to see. But you see certain pieces now talking about the debt crisis within Sri Lanka, and a lot of it is focused on China. And they keep talking about China, and they're kind of framing it within the Belt and Road Initiative, saying, oh, but China is exploiting the global South, and they're creating these financial problems, which is not true. Like, Sri Lanka does have debt with China, but it's really only 10%. The largest portion of that debt comes from the IMF. So, yeah, man, and this is something that's been happening for not just recently, like the last 40 years, they're saying. So, I'm looking at the actual foreign debt summary on the Sri Lankan government website. So, this is Sri Lanka's actual reportings. In fact, this is their debt summary as of the end of April 2021. So it's not super updated, but this is an idea of what we can get. And so they talk about, there's a pie chart of the debt stock. And so China has a very short, only 10%. And then they have the Asian Development Bank. So China is, in terms of the debt stock, second, and then there's the Asian Development Bank, which is third, and then Japan, which is fourth, the World Bank. But they also have market borrowings. That's the major share, which is also linked with IMF. Yeah. Anyway, so they talk about the debt stock by currency. And so they want to say that it's the Chinese yuan that is driving this economic situation. But then you look at their debt stock, and it's very low. It barely even tops 10%. Meanwhile, when you look at US dollars, it's well over 60%. Like, you look at from 2012 to 2018, it went from 35% to 65%. And that's just in US dollars. So, of course, they want to talk about, China driving this economic situation, but the majority of the debt and currency is from US dollars and also the IMF. So, yeah. Again, and that's really what they're trying to frame, what they're trying to do. Again, all these economic situations that happen in the global South is directly because of the IMF and the World Bank system and the United States and just the West in general, just exploiting them, propping up right-wing regimes that exploit working class peoples. So, you're seeing, of course, the uprising and people, overthrowing this government. Sure, absolutely, this is a great sign to see. But then you see stuff like The Economist talking about, you see, because China, using their Belt and Road, they try to frame it as colonialism, which is like the co-colonialism of the Belt and Road Initiative isn't even anywhere near as bad as the colonialism and imperialism committed by the West. Just flat out, not even the same thing. And a lot of the times they forgive debt, interest. So yeah, I mean, China's actually building roads and building schools and hospitals, and what they're doing is they're developing the infrastructure that would increase production of these economies in Africa, which would help them pay off the debt. You see? Because you don't see America building schools and when they do, it's always these charity events. So it's never the U.S. actually you see the level of investment from China versus the U.S. is not the same. There's a reason why when you look at in terms of trading, there's a reason why China is increasingly becoming the biggest partner for the global South, because China actually develops their infrastructure, which would help increase production to help that nation pay off the debt that they have with China. Again, it's business, right? It's trade and business. And it's not like, again, like China hasn't invaded these nations. Like, they haven't, because they're directly developing their economy and their infrastructure. Yeah, again, when you see the investments that happen from the West, it's mainly exclusively for the stuff that will help these multinational corporations. Like, you hear stories about Cuba before the Cuban Revolution, and they had developed infrastructure, but it was exclusively for the sugarcane industries and all these other industries that were owned by these multinational corporations. And anytime, of course, whenever the nation starts nationalizing those industries, what a surprise, a coup happens, because nationalizing the industry and redistributing the wealth for working peoples in these third world, quote, third world global South nations, that's against foreign policy for the U.S. and the West. And of course, that has to be stepped on. That's not the policy for China. But of course, you get these hit pieces about Sri Lanka trying to frame their crisis as the fault of the Chinese, when it's not even like 10% of the debt. Like, the vast majority of the debt is U.S. dollars. But hey, that's something we have to look at more. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about with the international segment, which is quite a bit. I've been talking quite a bit this episode. So I wanted to finish up with just talks about weather issues, climate issues, and just, right now we're in the deep summertime, and we're experiencing heat all over the world. And of course, like the UK and Western Europe is Spain and Portugal, they're having wildfires. So yeah, this is pretty bad. This heat is accelerating, and it's getting worse and worse. And even in Europe too, like, they don't have their houses are not designed to deal with this heat. A lot of the houses are actually designed to trap heat, and they don't have the same dependence as air conditioning as we do, say, in the South in the U.S. Like, again, dude, like, it gets so hot. Like, we have like a heat index of like 110. Like, I'm just blasting cold air, because like it just blasts all day, because like I have to keep it at 70. And then like ERCOT is like making recommendations. Oh no, you should keep it at 80. It's like, what the fuck? Why am I gonna keep it at 80? It's like, I'm paying for energy. I want cold air because it's fucking hot. And then you want me to sleep at that's what they recommend. It's just, wow. Anyway, I'll talk about Texas and the ERCOT system, but right now I want to talk about just global weather conditions and forecasts, which, they were forecasting for 2050, but the forecast for 2050 is coming true already. Like, it's already happening. So like, when they say like this is the worst of the worst case scenarios, like, it is like, it's even worse than that. Like, we're already ahead by like 3 decades. Like, that's how fucked we are, man. My goodness. Oh my God. Yeah, so from reading from CNN. So 2 years ago, forecasters in the UK conducted an interesting thought experiment. What will our forecast look like for 2050? The climate crisis is pushing weather to the extreme all over the world, and temperatures in the northern latitudes have been particularly sensitive to these changes. So meteorologists at the UK Meteorological Office, the Office Weather Forecast Agency for the UK, dove in to the super long-range climate models in the summer of 2050 to see what kind of temperatures they'd be forecasting in about 3 decades. So, quote, not actual weather forecasts, the Met Office's graphic said, quote, examples of plausible weather based on climate projections. Well, on Monday and Tuesday, the plausible became reality, 28 years early. Simon Lee, an atmospheric scientist at Columbia University in New York, noted the striking similarity between the 2050 outlook and the forecast for early next week in the UK. Quote, today the forecast for Tuesday is shockingly almost identical for large parts of the country, Simon tweeted, adding in a later post that what is coming on Tuesday gives an insight into the future. Right. So it's just like, this is already getting so bad, and like we can't meet, like, it's just, oh my God, it's just like, it's already here, man. Like, this is no longer a hypothetical. It's here. It's like, hello, man, it's a hot one. It's just like, when Mac and Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, they go to the suburbs, and then the neighbor's like, boy, it's a hot one. Yeah, you don't say. God, it's again, I can't help but laugh sometimes because it's just like it's right there in front of you, man. Everybody, man, it's so hot. Man, it's so hot. Really, you don't say. Wow. But of course, if you say, I mean, again, like, there's nothing else to do except say I told you so. But of course, that makes you the asshole, right? But yeah, whatever. Right, so temperatures are forecast to run 10 to 15 degrees warmer than normal early next week in the UK. Highs could approach 40 degrees Celsius, around 104 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time, a prediction that prompted meteorologists there to issue a red heat warning for the first time ever. To be clear, this would be truly record-breaking heat. The country's hottest temperature ever measured was 38.7 degrees Celsius at the Cambridge Botanic Garden in 2019. It's also clearly a sign of how rapidly the climate crisis is altering our weather. Quote, "We hope we wouldn't get into this situation," the Met Office's climate attribution scientist Nikos Christidis said in a statement. Quote, "Climate change has already influenced the likelihood of temperature extremes in the UK. The chances of seeing a 40 degrees Celsius days in the UK could be as much as 10 times more likely in the current climate than under a natural climate unaffected by human influence. The chance of exceeding 40 degrees is increasing rapidly," Christidis said. "This is about more than a few uncomfortable days. Extreme heat is among the most deadly weather events. We just don't tend to see it happening in the moment when heat stroke and death are attributed to underlying conditions like heart illness or respiratory disease. And recent reports would suggest no more than 5% of UK homes have air conditioning to help keep their residents cool. That is insane. Wow, 5%. This is so bad, dude. Oh my God. Yeah, that's like one thing that American tourists they say whenever they go abroad to Europe, they're like, yeah, there's no air conditioning. What the hell? Yeah, man. It's just like, yeah. Anyway, and then of course, like, air conditioning, also that is an issue because, like, where's the power source coming from? Oh, look, a coal plant. Oh, well, lovely. Yeah, right. A shockingly similar situation played out in the United States just last summer when the Pacific Northwest was plagued with extreme heat for days. Hundreds of people died in that heat wave. Officials in British Columbia noted that more than 800 excess deaths occurred during the heat, deaths that were unexpected and far from the norm for that time of the year. Unlike flooding or wildfires destroying a town, the sense of urgency around a deadly heat wave is not so dramatic, said Christy Eby, a climate and health researcher at the University of Washington, underscoring that heat is a, quote, silent killer. Quote, "When it's hot outside, it's just plain hot outside. And so it's a relatively silent killer," Eby previously told CNN. Quote, "People are generally unaware and don't think about the risk associated with these high temperatures." She also said that it's important to understand that the climate is not like what it was even just a few years ago. The climate crisis is already affecting our lives today and will continue to hit the most vulnerable. Quote, "We all look forward to the summer as we enjoy the warmer temperatures, but there are people who are at risk at higher temperatures," she said. Quote, "As the climate continues to change or higher temperatures get higher than what we experienced when we were younger, people need to pay attention more, and particularly to those around you." So, yeah, it's this is a pretty serious situation in terms of the heat. It just keeps getting worse, and we're not ready for it. We're really not ready for it. Our infrastructure, our energy infrastructure, people in homes. I mean, like, they're talking about excess deaths, and they're already reporting in, like, Spain and Portugal, like 1,000 people have already died from the heat. It's just crazy. Like, I can't imagine living. Again, I had a blackout a couple weeks ago, and so just that one day alone, living with no air conditioning and power, dude, like, that was a horrible experience. And I was lucky to have, like, a little fan to, like, blow in my face. But bro, like, this heat is no joke, man. Even in nighttime, it's no joke. And I'm going to talk now about some weather events in Texas. Recently, we've been experiencing drought. Although I believe it was Thursday, we had some rain, and that was nice to see. We had a pretty big flash of rain, so that was definitely helpful. Some of the trees and the grass got some green. We had some showers Friday, so there we go. We had a little of a break. At least in my specific area, East Texas, we had a bit of a break in terms of fire, drought conditions. But hey, it's so hot that like, it basically just like evaporates within a week, and then we're back in the same burn ban situation. So hopefully we get some more rain, although like the rain that we had last week, the rain that we had was very much like a flash flooding, flash rainstorm event. So it just like came and just like dropped, and then it just went on about its business. So yeah, again, that's something to keep an eye on. And I'm also trying to keep an eye on in terms of storm events, because of course, like the Gulf is going to become, again, like the Gulf waters are very warm right now, and that's going to turn into a breeding ground for storms and weather systems. So that's something to pay attention to. Yeah. And again, we can only hope for some rain, but not a hurricane, because as I said, the waters are very warm, and it's going to cause rapid intensification. And so we could see a storm that's like starts off as a category 1, like literally like within like a 48-hour time frame. It could get to a category 4 or category 5. Like that's how bad it gets. So yeah, so that's just something to keep an eye on. Yeah, we're living on the Gulf Coast, but that's speculation. Of course, we can look at the ocean temperatures and maybe speculate on what different weather systems could pop up. However, we're still stuck in the drought, even though we had a bit of a break from the rain. We're still stuck in the drought, heat conditions. And as I was talking about with our energy system, our energy grid and infrastructure, we're not ready to deal with this. We're not ready for this. And it's just ridiculous that we have ERCOT, which is the regulatory body for energy in Texas. They're saying, the CEO says that he did not expect it to be as hot as it is now, which is fucking ridiculous. We can get the benefit of the doubt saying that we weren't ready for the grid system, winterizing, even though like, living in Texas, like it gets cold. We get cold snaps. So like, of course it was like a one-off event, but scientists were saying, hey, you're not ready for this. And it's just cheaper to keep it as it is and then deal with the class action lawsuits afterwards. It's cheaper to deal with that than it is to actually prepare the grid system and make sure that it doesn't collapse in times of extreme weather, especially with heat. Because again, you can say, okay, well, you may have not been prepared for a once in a blue moon blizzard, but come on, Texas has always been hot. I did not expect it to be as hot as it is. Shut the fuck up! Are you kidding me? And they have not done anything. They have not done anything to prepare the grid system. And already they're talking about conserving energy and like, what? We're going to have a blackout in the middle of a drought, middle of a heat wave. And it's like, we didn't expect it. How did you not? This is what I mean, man. They're not fixing shit. And this is why I do the prepping for grid down situations. I have to make sure that I have water supplies in order. I don't necessarily have the MREs as I would like, non-perishable foods, but that's something I have to keep stocking up on. I do have some propane burners for cooking. Yeah, man, I gotta do all this prepping because our grid system isn't ready for. We can't even be ready for the heat in the summer. Oh, I didn't expect it to be as hot as it. What the fuck, man? And also, this is a rapidly developing area. People are moving here. So there's the case to be made that they're not doing anything to keep the infrastructure, the grid up to standard. And then also it's being, the supply isn't meeting the demand because they keep growing. They have these population centers. Like Houston is the biggest growing city in the country right now. It really is. They're developing that and people keep moving here. And they're still not doing anything to upgrade the grid to meet the demand of people moving in. And then also it's getting hotter. So there's more demand for energy because it's fucking hot. Oh, but we weren't ready for this heat. What? Yeah, man. And then of course, the Texas Republicans, they don't want to oh no, because we're all about small government. So they want, because ERCOT is a private institution. A lot of this is privatized. Yeah, man. This is again, this is why I want to get the fuck out of Texas. This is a fucking shithole, man. My goodness. Right. So reading from KHOU, people who have lived in Houston for a while expect hot summers, but this one has been next level. Now the head of ERCOT has admitted to a Houston newspaper that they did not expect it to be as hot as it is. The power grid operator has a chart online that shows projected supply and demand in real time. Look at later on Wednesday, the blue dotted line that represents demand is neck and neck, even passes the purple supply line between 1 p.m., 1:30 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. So that's usually like the, those heat hours, after noon to like 10 p.m. even, like it's hot. And then even at nighttime, like there's that residual radiation in the concrete, especially in Houston. I live in Huntsville, so this is more of Huntsville is a pretty small town, so it's pretty, urbanized and developed, but it's considered like a suburb. We're like at the very edge of like the Houston metropolitan area, but we're like in the midst of like these national forests, so it's still a lot of green. But in Houston, it's all steel and concrete, and that's going to do a lot to, with the radiation of the heat. So, yeah, man, right. So yeah, the ERCOT interim CEO Brad Jones says he is concerned about some of the state's older power generators keeping up with the record demand for power this summer, because you guys didn't upgrade it. You guys just keep they're like, oh, we're concerned. Hey, why don't you upgrade the system? No, but you see, because we're concerned about the supply and demand, and then they don't do anything to fix the grid. So Jones said the extreme heat scenario for this summer estimated that demand could reach about 81,000 megawatts, which was the original forecast for Monday. Originally, forecasters gave that a 5% chance of happening, according to Jones. Quote, the 81,000 megawatts was the extreme, but those numbers are in the system. We just start with what we think that the expected case is. In early May, the expected case was 77,000 megawatts, he said. But he's hopeful that they'll be able to keep everyone's light on. So far, there haven't been significant outages. ERCOT says one reason is because requests for people to conserve energy have worked. So KHO 11 News has received several questions from viewers asking if big companies that use the most power are required to conserve energy when there's a threat of outages in the state. The answer is no. It's optional for business. It's optional for businesses just like the rest of us. ERCOT says it hopes big businesses comply with requests. They won't. As of this morning, the grid operator has not called for anyone to conserve energy the rest of the week. Right. That's just what they're dealing with. And again, like they're already saying, oh, we're concerned because these generators are older. Then upgrade it. But they won't. They're not going to do that. And again, like I'm very concerned about weather conditions in the winter. If we get through this summer, and also if we don't experience any major hurricanes, because that's also going to damage the infrastructure. So it's like there's natural disaster after natural disaster, which weakens and cracks up the infrastructure, and they don't do anything to upgrade it. Like they just patch it up, but that's it. It's like you're putting a Band-Aid over like this gaping wound in the infrastructure, and it's like we're concerned about the heat, but you guys aren't fixing the system. You guys aren't fixing anything. As I said, like the official count of death toll from the blizzard in Texas is a little under 300, about I think 276. That's like the official count, but it's far worse than that. Like some estimates go as high as 1,000. And again, like this is like the goldfish like attention span that a lot of Americans have. It's like when I talk about the prepping that I do, and the reason why I do it, because again, I have lived through natural disaster after natural disaster, and so it's like, okay, like I have to do this because like the infrastructure just like it goes kaput. It's like, oh no, you would have been fine. But if I didn't waste my money getting, say, like fire starting equipment, water filters, all this other prepping stuff, like I literally would have just been stuck there without any source of heat, any clean water, any way to charge my phone, to communicate. Like, yeah, man. So it's like, I have to do this because otherwise, like, who am I going to listen to? How am I going to, like, nobody came knocking on my door saying, you okay? We got some supplies. Nobody. No cops, no nothing. Like, we are so not ready. And this is just for winter. And, we'll have to see further on this drought if we start getting fires and such. Who knows? We'll have to pay attention to that. But again, man, it's just like, the government doesn't do anything to get ready for this, and then a disaster comes, and it's like you're kind of on your own. And yeah. So anyway, so I just want to talk at least about. There was they had a weather station, reporting on the heat, and like literally like the meteorologists experienced a blackout because they were still doing blackouts. So like they had a blackout in the middle of the report. So it's just like, yeah, man, this is what's going to keep happening. So before I wrap up with the show, because this is a pretty long episode, I just want to talk at least about just Texas again. How Texas can in comparison to other states, we're experiencing a lot of natural disasters. I mean, we're the hardest hit in terms of natural disasters. I'm a witness to Hurricane Harvey. I was even like a witness to say Hurricane Ike, which was earlier, like 2008, and that caused some damage as well. So yeah, man, and this is going to continue to happen. We're going to see further, weather events and temperature extremes. So I'm reading from Spectrum Local News. So they're talking about just the damage in terms of money, right? So analysts from QuoteWizard.com looked at data from the Nation Centers for Environmental Information and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They analyzed statistics from over the last 40 years and found that in that time, major disasters have increased by 203% in Texas, the most of any state. So the cost of damage ranges between 200 and 340 billion. So the data shows that Texas has had 137 natural disasters, and that 103 of them have happened in the last 20 years. Hawaii has had the fewest natural disasters. Severe storms are the most common natural disaster, but there have been increases in the number of wildfires, floods, and cyclones. So tornadoes can happen in almost every state, but most happen in the Midwest and Southeast. Data from the National Weather Service showed that Texas suffered 118 tornadoes in 2021, the most of any state. So while there's no sign these natural disasters will stop soon, homeowners should take precautions to protect themselves. Homeowner insurance covers some natural disasters, but not all. And so, yeah, that is just what they're showing. And they have this image of the flooding from Hurricane Harvey. And yeah, man, that brings back some memories, because like, yeah, man, my area was flooded. Like as I said, like they had boats and helicopter rescues, and like it was a pretty serious thing. I mean, luckily nobody got hurt in my area, but yeah, man, like we were flooded out for real. Yeah, man. And as I said, we're experiencing the extreme weathers, hurricanes and floodings, but also wildfires and droughts, and now also every once in a while a blizzard. So this is just what's happening here. And also, as I've said, Texas is a big state. People are moving here. This is one of the biggest growing states in the country. And it's like our infrastructure is not prepared for this. As Urquhart said, the grid system is old, it's weak, and it's being outstripped because of this demand of this rapid expansion. Like, how can you continue to expand these cities, like these megalopolis cities, and like not do anything to improve the infrastructure to meet the growing demand that's naturally coming, especially with this heat? Like, how the fuck? Oh, we did not expect it to get hot. It's like, what? It's Texas, man. It's always hot. Oh my God. It's like they're not. And then still they complain and they want people to conserve energy, but they are not going to do anything to improve the infrastructure. And of course, like the state government isn't going to do anything to nationalize it, or they want to keep it privatized. And again, they're going to make further arguments to privatize the energy system, which is going to, it's just like this place is again, they talk about Texas being the land of opportunity, and it's like I'm trying to get out of here. that's just my plan. I just need to get the fuck out of here, because like this is not going in a good direction, and more people are going to keep coming here, and this government is not going to do anything to improve the infrastructure and the grid system. And yeah, we're just going to see how things fall apart, because this place is not ready to meet this influx of growth. But yeah, man, Texas is gonna, it's gonna be a rude awakening. And then also like the ERCOT system, they can't, they can't meet the energy demands, and then like, these Republicans are pushing for secession. Like there's like real people in power pushing for secession. So it's like you can't even like provide basic energy during the summertime, which the heat is always expected, but you still want to secede. And then watch what happens when a natural disaster. And, oh, federal aid. Oh, wait, we're not even part of the. It's like you want the aid whenever stuff pops off, but then it's like, but we're our own thing. Yeah, it's just they're putting Texas in the bad spot. But of course they're going to blame the migrants, right? The migrant crisis, right? Or radical left-wing opportunists, or this state is going to go down a fascist rabbit hole. Pretty, it's going to get extreme and radical. But that's really what I wanted to talk at least for this episode. And so, it's a pretty long episode, and I've been dealing with a lot of different stuff in terms of work. So I kind of just I didn't prepare as well as I wanted to. So, I apologize if it may have seemed unprofessional, rushed. But, I got so much to focus on, such as registering with classes. Hopefully that goes well. But then, there's always some last minute stuff. So I just want to start with class and just finish up this last year, because I only have 30 hours left. But yeah, man, yeah. And also just talking about, because I've mentioned in passing about doing other projects, like history documentaries and projects, and it's it's such a huge project, and then I have to balance between work and just not burning myself out. So it's just these history projects that I have in mind is probably just going to be something I'm going to have to do after I graduate. So for the time being, I'm just going to have to research, because there's so many different subject matters I want to uncover. And the thing about history, it's like a thread. So you want to do one specific topic, and then it's oh no, but I have to give context to this other thing, and then it's like a thread, and you just keep going and going and going. And then so yeah, that's something that I'm going to have to release when I'm ready for that. Because again, when you look at the content on YouTube that is successful, it's usually short, digestible, they do the 10-minute history summarized videos, but which works, that works for some people. But again, history is you have to give proper context, and you have to dive deep, because you can't view a history, you can't view the Industrial Revolution in isolation. You can't just say well, they had the steam engine and coal, and then no, you have to look at earlier developments of the factory system, using water mills, and then also the imperialist trade system with American cotton, the Indian cotton. There's so much to unpack just from the Industrial Revolution. And you have to and not only that, you have to talk about these dynamics, urbanization dynamics, and the accumulation of capital in the ruling class from feudal systems. So yeah, it's a lot. So you want to talk about the Industrial Revolution, but then you have to talk about all these other things that happened before. You have to it grows into that. So that's just something I have to do later on. But it's I have my job, which isn't history related, but I want to continue with history projects. So the job is mainly just to sustain my needs, bills and such, and then I can focus on other projects. But again, with school coming up, that's going to eat up a lot of my time, so I need to focus on that. And I can do this podcast as some audio blog journal. But yeah, I'm still brainstorming, and again, this is still something that's new to me, doing extra content. So again, I just want to have fun with this and work when I can, but hopefully after graduation I can commit truly full time towards extra historical podcasting or historical documentaries that, I have in mind. But again, that's something that I want to touch up on later. As for now, though, I do appreciate those listening and my Patreons listening who have early access to this. I would recommend y'all, signing on for that. You can only really do $1 and then help me out there. Otherwise, though, appreciate the listeners sticking by. I mean, this is a long episode. There's a lot to talk about. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and have a beautiful day. Hang in there. Thank you so much.